Imagine an island that isn't anchored to the earth, a landmass that drifts, moves, and reshapes itself with the changing seasons. A place where trees grow, animals thrive, and yet the ground beneath it is anything but solid. Floating islands sound like something out of a myth or a sci-fi movie, but they are real, and they exist all over the world. What forces allow an island to defy the laws of nature and drift freely across lakes, rivers, and even oceans? How do entire ecosystems manage to survive on something so unstable? And most importantly, where did the largest, most mysterious floating islands go when they vanished without a trace? Throughout history, these wandering landmasses have fascinated explorers, baffled scientists, and even terrified locals. Some are natural, formed by dense vegetation and tangled roots breaking free from the shore. Others have more mysterious origins, appearing suddenly in waters where no land should be. Tonight, we'll dive into the most incredible floating island mysteries ever recorded. From a legendary landmass in Argentina that seems to move on its own, to ancient Chinese records describing an island that vanished overnight, to modern-day sightings of new, unexplained, floating formations appearing in the middle of the ocean. So sit back, relax, and let's explore the secrets of the floating island. The deeper we go, the stranger it gets. The vanishing islands of Loktak Lake is a captivating and mysterious phenomenon that has puzzled explorers, historians, and locals alike. Situated in the northeastern part of India, in the state of Manipur, Loktak Lake is not just any ordinary body of water. It is the largest freshwater lake in northeastern India, covering an area of over 300 square kilometers. Known for its breathtaking beauty and unique ecosystem, the lake is home to several floating islands, which are an enigma in themselves. But these islands are not made of solid land. They are actually floating masses of vegetation and soil, known locally as fumdis. These islands have been a subject of intrigue for centuries, with their origins, functionality, and the reasons behind their mysterious vanishing being points of intense debate. At the heart of this mystery lies the vanishing act of these islands. The fumdis, which once formed large, expansive islands on the lake, are increasingly disappearing, leading to environmental, cultural, and social consequences that have profound implications for the surrounding region. The fumdis are dynamic, constantly shifting, and some even appear to be dissolving into the waters of the lake, leaving behind no trace. This phenomenon has only gained more attention in recent years due to increasing environmental concerns, climate change, and human intervention. The history of Loktak Lake is deeply tied to the local communities who have lived in the region for centuries. The Manipuri people, who have a rich cultural and historical heritage, have long relied on the lake for their livelihoods. The lake's fumdis are not just natural features. They play a critical role in the daily lives of the people. These floating islands are used for a variety of purposes, from agriculture to fishing, and even as platforms for homes. They are so intertwined with the identity of the Manipuri people that the lake is often referred to as the lifeline of Manipur. However, the importance of these fumdis goes beyond the practical. They are also deeply ingrained in the spiritual and cultural fabric of the region. The Manipuri people have a strong connection to the lake, with many myths, legends, and traditions surrounding it. One of the most significant religious festivals in Manipur, the Lai Haraoba, is celebrated in honor of the local deities and it takes place near the shores of Loktak Lake. The lake's serene beauty and the Fumdi's floating nature have often been seen as symbols of balance and harmony in the universe. It is not just a source of livelihood, but also a sacred space. Despite their cultural significance, the Fumdis have faced significant threats over the years. Over-exploitation of the lake's resources, unchecked development, and the degradation of the environment have all contributed to the decline of the Fumdis. Large portions of the floating islands have broken apart or vanished completely. The root causes of this disappearance can be traced to several factors, many of which are human-induced. One of the most significant contributors to the vanishing of the islands is the rapid increase in human population and the subsequent rise in demand for agricultural land and resources. In many cases, the surrounding communities have turned to the lake for additional farming and fishing opportunities, disrupting the delicate balance of the ecosystem. The construction of infrastructure around the lake, including roads and buildings, has also led to environmental changes that have negatively impacted the Fumdis. The rise in pollution levels, due to both industrial and domestic waste being dumped into the lake, has had a detrimental effect on the overall health of the ecosystem. The degradation of water quality has led to a decline in biodiversity, affecting not only the Fumdis, but also the various species of plants and animals that depend on the lake for survival. Many of the aquatic species that once thrived in the lake, such as the endangered Sangai deer, have been pushed to the brink of extinction as the lake's environment continues to deteriorate. The rapid spread of invasive species in Loktak Lake has further exacerbated the situation. Invasive plants like water hyacinth have taken root in the lake, smothering the native flora and changing the composition of the ecosystem. These invasive species are not only harmful to the lake's biodiversity, but also contribute to the erosion of the Fumdis, making it harder for them to stay intact. The rise in water levels due to heavy rainfall and deforestation in the surrounding hills has also contributed to the destabilization of the floating islands. Another major factor in the disappearance of the Fumdis is the impact of climate change. The region of Manipur, like many parts of the world, is experiencing the effects of a changing climate. Increasing temperatures, erratic rainfall patterns, and rising water levels have all played a role in altering the lake's delicate ecosystem. The Fumdis, which are essentially large floating mats of vegetation, are particularly vulnerable to these changes. Rising water levels can cause the islands to become waterlogged and eventually break apart, leading to their disappearance. Despite these challenges, efforts are being made to preserve and protect Loktak Lake and its floating islands. The government, along with local communities and environmental organizations, has initiated several conservation projects aimed at saving the lake's unique ecosystem. One such initiative is the Loktak Lake Conservation Plan, which focuses on reducing pollution levels, controlling invasive species, and promoting sustainable farming practices in the surrounding areas. The government has also designated Loktak Lake as a protected area, with restrictions on fishing and other activities that may harm the environment. There are also ongoing efforts to restore the Fumdis by replanting native vegetation and stabilizing the floating islands. Scientists and environmentalists are studying the lake's ecosystem in great detail, trying to find innovative solutions to the problems faced by the Fumdis. One such initiative involves using traditional knowledge and modern techniques to build floating platforms that mimic the natural process of the Fumdis, providing a sustainable solution to the vanishing islands. These efforts are still in the early stages, but they offer hope for the future of Loktak Lake and its remarkable ecosystem. Loktak Lake is not just a geographical feature. It is a symbol of the fragile balance between nature and human development. The disappearance of the floating islands is a reminder of the consequences of unchecked exploitation and environmental degradation. It serves as a wake-up call for all of us to take better care of the natural world around us and to ensure that the delicate ecosystems that sustain life are preserved for future generations. The vanishing islands of Loktak Lake are a poignant reminder of the impact of human actions on the environment, and they provide an opportunity for reflection and change. The question remains, will we be able to reverse the damage before it is too late? The challenges facing Loktak Lake and its vanishing islands are not limited to environmental degradation alone. They are also tied to the local communities who depend on the lake for their livelihoods. The Manipuri people, who have lived alongside the lake for generations, are now facing the direct consequences of the loss of the floating islands. Their way of life, built around the natural resources of Loktak Lake, is slowly being eroded as the islands disappear and the ecosystem changes. For centuries, the Fumdis have provided a unique platform for agriculture. The Manipuri people practice a form of floating agriculture known as Fumdi cultivation. This method involves planting crops like rice, vegetables, and fruits on the floating islands themselves. The roots of the plants anchor themselves in the rich soil and vegetation that makes up the Fumdis. This form of agriculture is highly sustainable, as it allows the farmers to cultivate crops without disturbing the lake's delicate ecosystem. It also provides an effective way to use the lake's resources without negatively impacting its natural balance. However, as the Fumdis begin to disintegrate and disappear, the availability of these fertile agricultural lands has dwindled. Farmers who once relied on the floating islands for their crops are now finding themselves with fewer options. With the islands becoming increasingly unstable, many farmers have been forced to move their cultivation to the lake's shores or to other regions, where the soil and water conditions may not be as favorable. This shift not only impacts the local economy, but also disrupts a centuries-old practice that was perfectly adapted to the unique environment of Loktak Lake. The loss of the Fumdis thus represents not just an ecological disaster, but also a cultural one, as generations of knowledge and tradition tied to floating agriculture begin to fade. The impact of the disappearing islands extends beyond agriculture. The Fumdis also serve as crucial habitats for a wide range of wildlife, including birds, fish, and amphibians. The lake is home to several endangered species, such as the Manipuri brow-antlered deer, also known as the sangai. This rare species, which is endemic to the region, relies heavily on the lake's ecosystem for food and shelter. The vanishing of the Fumdis has placed an additional strain on these species, as their habitats continue to shrink. The sangai, in particular, has been forced into a more restricted area as the islands disappear, leaving them vulnerable to poaching and habitat loss. The situation has become so dire that the sangai has been included in various conservation efforts aimed at saving both the lake and its inhabitants. The government of Manipur, along with local conservation groups, has been working on a multi-pronged approach to protect the lake's biodiversity. These efforts include habitat restoration programs, stricter regulations on poaching, and awareness campaigns to educate the public on the importance of preserving the lake's ecosystem. While these initiatives have had some success, the ongoing threats to the lake's environment continue to pose significant challenges for both the local wildlife and the human populations that rely on it. The loss of the floating islands has also led to changes in the way local communities interact with the lake. In the past, people lived on the Fumdis, building their homes and fishing platforms directly on the floating islands. This unique form of living allowed them to remain close to the water, where they could easily access the lake's resources. However, as the islands have become less stable and more difficult to navigate, many people have been forced to abandon their homes on the Fumdis and move to the lake's shores. This has not only changed the way the people live, but also disrupted their deep cultural connection to the lake. The very idea of living on the water, as their ancestors did, is becoming increasingly unfeasible. The shift from living on floating islands to permanent homes on solid ground has been a slow and painful process for the communities that call the lake home. The decline of the Fumdis has also been a wake-up call for those who have long overlooked the environmental importance of Loktak Lake. For years, the lake has been subject to pollution from industrial and domestic waste, largely due to the lack of a structured waste management system in the surrounding areas. The water quality has steadily declined, affecting the aquatic life that depends on it. Fish populations, which were once abundant, have decreased in number, while invasive species like water hyacinth have taken over large portions of the lake. The growing pollution has caused a dramatic shift in the lake's ecosystem, making it harder for the Fumdis to remain intact and for the native flora and fauna to thrive. Addressing this issue has become a priority for both the local government and environmental organizations. Various initiatives have been launched to clean the lake, remove invasive species, and promote more sustainable practices. One of the key programs is the removal of water hyacinth, which has formed thick mats on the surface of the lake, suffocating native plants and fish. While some progress has been made in reducing the spread of this invasive plant, the sheer scale of the problem means that it is an ongoing battle. Efforts to reduce pollution in the lake have also focused on improving waste management in the surrounding communities. The government has established waste collection and disposal systems in certain areas, encouraging residents to dispose of their trash properly and recycle when possible. However, the effectiveness of these programs has been limited by a lack of public awareness and a general resistance to change. Educating the local population about the importance of waste management and environmental conservation has been one of the biggest hurdles in the efforts to protect Loktak Lake. Beyond environmental conservation, there have also been efforts to raise awareness of the cultural and spiritual significance of Loktak Lake. Various initiatives have been undertaken to showcase the importance of the lake to the local people and highlight the need for its preservation. The lake is not just a natural resource. It is a source of pride, identity, and history for the Manipuri people. By focusing on the cultural significance of Loktak Lake, these initiatives hope to foster a sense of responsibility and connection to the environment, motivating people to take a more active role in its conservation. Despite the challenges, there is hope for the future of Loktak Lake and its unique floating islands. Through a combination of conservation efforts, government support, and community involvement, it is possible to slow down or even reverse some of the damage done to the lake's ecosystem. The key to preserving the Fumdis and the lake itself lies in balancing the needs of the environment with those of the local communities. The floating islands are not just an ecological curiosity. They are an integral part of the cultural and economic life of the people of Manipur. By recognizing this connection and working together, it may be possible to save Loktak Lake and ensure that its vanishing islands are not lost forever. The mystery of the vanishing islands of Loktak Lake is not just a story of environmental destruction, but also one of resilience and adaptation. It is a story of a community's struggle to survive and preserve their way of life in the face of increasingly difficult circumstances. The future of Loktak Lake and its floating islands remains uncertain, but the efforts to protect and restore this unique ecosystem offer a glimmer of hope for a more sustainable and harmonious future. The shifting death traps of the Sud. A Nile swamp where floating islands swallow explorers whole. Why do they move? And why have so many disappeared forever? The Sud, a vast and mysterious swamp located along the Nile River in Sudan, is one of the most dangerous and enigmatic places on Earth. Stretching across an area of about 30,000 square kilometers, it is one of the world's largest wetlands, yet it remains relatively unexplored due to the treacherous terrain and the numerous dangers lurking within. The Sud is home to a variety of unique ecosystems, including floating islands, some of which have swallowed explorers whole, never to be seen again. These moving islands, known locally as Darb, present a danger not only to those who venture into the swamp, but also to the very fabric of our understanding of how such places function. The Sud's floating islands are an astonishing phenomenon. These islands, made of dense vegetation and mud, drift atop the swamp's water, forming what can only be described as shifting death traps for anyone who dares to cross them. The floating masses of reeds, papyrus, and other plant matter can range in size from a few meters to several kilometers in length. They are not stationary, as one might expect of a traditional island, but instead move with the current, sometimes unexpectedly shifting in unpredictable directions. The islands can be swept away by the Nile's water flow, carried by the winds, or even destabilized by changes in water levels. The floating islands present an uncharted and highly hazardous environment for anyone trying to navigate through the Sud. The exact mechanisms that cause these islands to shift and move are not fully understood. Scientists have speculated that the movement is primarily driven by the seasonal fluctuations of water in the Nile River and the Sud's wetlands. During the rainy season, the Nile floods, raising the water levels and creating swift currents. As a result, the islands, which are loosely anchored by their vegetation, drift along with the water, carried by the current. In contrast, during the dry season the water level recedes, and the islands are left stranded, often entangled in the swamp's dense network of reeds and mud. This shifting nature of the islands makes them highly unstable and incredibly dangerous, as they can suddenly collapse or shift positions, leading to the loss of both explorers and wildlife. The swamp's shifting terrain and the unpredictability of the floating islands contribute to the numerous disappearances of explorers and adventurers who have tried to cross the Sud in search of knowledge, resources, or simply to uncover the mysteries of the region. Many of these explorers never returned, their last known locations marked only by abandoned equipment and scattered remnants of their journey. The Sud has claimed the lives of countless individuals who ventured too far into its murky depths. The islands, that are seemingly harmless at first glance, can suddenly shift beneath the weight of a person or a boat, sending the unwitting victim plummeting into the swamp's water, where the currents are strong enough to drag them under. The deadly nature of these islands, coupled with the inhospitable conditions of the swamp, makes survival in the Sud a challenge even for the most prepared. The allure of the Sud is undeniable, with its promise of untapped resources, unknown species, and the opportunity to explore one of the Earth's most remote regions. Throughout history, the swamp has drawn numerous explorers, many of whom were motivated by the stories of riches, hidden lands, and ancient secrets buried beneath the swamp's murky waters. However, few have made it through the Sud alive. One of the earliest recorded attempts to navigate the Sud was in the 19th century by the Scottish explorer James Bruce, who came across the swamp during his travels along the Nile. Bruce, although not able to fully comprehend the vastness and complexity of the Sud, was one of the first to record the challenges posed by its shifting islands and treacherous conditions. The Sud's floating islands are made up of a complex system of vegetation, including papyrus, reeds, and water lilies. The roots of these plants form dense mats that float on the water's surface. As the plants grow and decay, they form a floating layer of organic material that can support the weight of small animals and even humans. Over time, these mats become more compact and resilient, allowing them to carry larger loads. The process by which these mats form is relatively simple. As plants grow, their roots intertwine and create a network that can withstand the force of the current. However, the islands are fragile, and when they are subjected to sudden shifts in water levels or external forces, they can break apart or drift away, creating hazards for those traveling across them. The shifting death traps of the Sud. A Nile swamp where floating islands swallow explorers whole. Why do they move? And why have so many disappeared forever? The Sud, a vast and mysterious swamp located along the Nile River in Sudan, is one of the most dangerous and enigmatic places on Earth. Stretching across an area of about 30,000 square kilometers, it is one of the world's largest wetlands, yet it remains relatively unexplored due to the treacherous terrain and the numerous dangers lurking within. The Sud is home to a variety of unique ecosystems, including floating islands, some of which have swallowed explorers whole, never to be seen again. These moving islands, known locally as Darb, present a danger not only to those who venture into the swamp, but also to the very fabric of our understanding of how such places function. The Sud's floating islands are an astonishing phenomenon. These islands, made of dense vegetation and mud, drift atop the swamp's water, forming what can only be described as shifting death traps for anyone who dares to cross them. The floating masses of reeds, papyrus, and other plant matter can range in size from a few meters to several kilometers in length. They are not stationary, as one might expect of a traditional island, but instead move with the current, sometimes unexpectedly shifting in unpredictable directions. The islands can be swept away by the Nile's water flow, carried by the winds, or even destabilized by changes in water levels. The floating islands present an uncharted and highly hazardous environment for anyone trying to navigate through the Sud. The exact mechanisms that cause these islands to shift and move are not fully understood. Scientists have speculated that the movement is primarily driven by the seasonal fluctuations of water in the Nile River and the Sud's wetlands. During the rainy season, the Nile floods, raising the water levels and creating swift currents. As a result, the islands, which are loosely anchored by their vegetation, drift along with the water, carried by the current. In contrast, during the dry season the water level recedes, and the islands are left stranded, often entangled in the swamp's dense network of reeds and mud. This shifting nature of the islands makes them highly unstable and incredibly dangerous, as they can suddenly collapse or shift positions, leading to the loss of both explorers and wildlife. The swamp's shifting terrain and the unpredictability of the floating islands contribute to the numerous disappearances of explorers and adventurers who have tried to cross the Sud in search of knowledge, resources, or simply to uncover the mysteries of the region. Many of these explorers never returned, their last known locations marked only by abandoned equipment and scattered remnants of their journey. The Sud has claimed the lives of countless individuals who ventured too far into its murky depths. The islands that are seemingly harmless at first glance can suddenly shift beneath the weight of a person or a boat, sending the unwitting victim plummeting into the swamp's water, where the currents are strong enough to drag them under. The deadly nature of these islands, coupled with the inhospitable conditions of the swamp, makes survival in the Sud a challenge even for the most prepared. The allure of the Sud is undeniable, with its promise of untapped resources, unknown species, and the opportunity to explore one of the Earth's most remote regions. Throughout history, the swamp has drawn numerous explorers, many of whom were motivated by the stories of riches, hidden lands, and ancient secrets buried beneath the swamp's murky waters. However, few have made it through the Sud alive. One of the earliest recorded attempts to navigate the Sud was in the 19th century by the Scottish explorer James Bruce, who came across the swamp during his travels along the Nile. Bruce, although not able to fully comprehend the vastness and complexity of the Sud, was one of the first to record the challenges posed by its shifting islands and treacherous conditions. The Sud's floating islands are made up of a complex system of vegetation, including papyrus, reeds, and water lilies. The roots of these plants form dense mats that float on the water's surface. As the plants grow and decay, they form a floating layer of organic material that can support the weight of small animals and even humans. Over time, these mats become more compact and resilient, allowing them to carry larger loads. The process by which these mats form is relatively simple. As plants grow, their roots intertwine and create a network that can withstand the force of the current. However, the islands are fragile, and when they are subjected to sudden shifts in water levels or external forces, they can break apart or drift away, creating hazards for those traveling across them. The mysteries of the Sud Swamp are compounded not just by the floating islands themselves, but by the region's nearly impenetrable environment and the tragic stories of those who sought to understand its complexities. What is even more fascinating about the Sud is how few people truly understand the swamp's power, and how those who venture too far into its heart rarely make it back. The floating islands, shifting and deceptive, are not the only dangers lurking beneath the surface. The thick, almost suffocating vegetation, the dense mat of papyrus, reeds, and water lilies, and the labyrinth of channels make navigation nearly impossible. Many explorers, when they first enter, are unaware of just how disorienting the swamp can be. The marshy land is home to a number of wild animals, some of which are potentially dangerous. Crocodiles are found in the waters, their keen eyes lurking beneath the surface, while the swamp's murky depths conceal venomous snakes, aggressive hippos, and other wildlife, all contributing to the inherent danger of the Sud. The air itself can be thick with humidity, often making travel grueling and draining. The dense vegetation can be overwhelming and difficult to penetrate, leaving those caught in it at the mercy of the swamp's vast network. The inescapable isolation, combined with the overwhelming wildlife, creates an atmosphere of dread that prevents even the most determined adventurers from pushing too far. But the deadliest threat of the Sud, beyond the animals or the physical terrain, lies in the shifting nature of the floating islands. Unlike other islands, which might be fixed and predictable, these islands appear to have a life of their own. Some researchers believe that the cause of their unpredictable movement lies in the unique hydrology of the Sud. The swamp is fed by the White Nile, a river that flows from Lake Victoria in Uganda and carries the potential to flood or recede at irregular intervals. When the floodwaters come, they push against the islands, sending them drifting along the water's surface. The constant movement of the floating islands means that explorers who fail to maintain constant awareness of their surroundings may find themselves adrift in the middle of the swamp, lost in an environment that can change on a whim. Over the years, the SUD has drawn the attention of not only adventurers, but also scientists, eager to study the unique ecosystem and the floating islands. Yet, even modern technology has failed to fully understand the swamp. Satellites and aerial imagery have provided detailed maps of the area, but they have not offered much insight into the movement of the islands or the true depth of the SUD's labyrinthine channels. Even more perplexing is the fact that some islands, after drifting for years, have vanished altogether. Where they once were, no trace remains, and the shifting tides seem to swallow them whole. It's as if they never existed, lost forever in the watery abyss. What happens to these islands? Where do they go? Some theories suggest that the islands may sink beneath the surface due to the weight of the accumulated vegetation. As more reeds, papyrus, and organic material build up over time, the islands may become too dense to float. The waterlogged mass could gradually sink deeper into the swamp, swallowed by the same current that once carried it across the surface. However, this theory doesn't account for the sudden, mysterious disappearances of certain islands. Some scientists believe that when a floating island is carried too far by the current, it may encounter deeper channels in the SUD, where the force of the water pulls it under. Others propose that these islands may simply drift into areas that are difficult to detect, hidden in the thickest parts of the swamp, beyond the reach of modern technology. Another eerie aspect of the SUD swamp's floating islands is the effect they have on those who traverse the region. The swamp has an unnerving quality, with its constant shifting landscape, the heavy humidity, and the constant threat of being swallowed by the water. For many explorers, the isolation is one of the greatest challenges. The sheer vastness of the SUD means that it is incredibly easy to get lost, and the constant movement of the islands only adds to the disorientation. It is said that the SUD has a strange ability to distort the senses, making it incredibly difficult to judge distances or directions. The flat, featureless terrain can trick the mind, and many explorers have reported a sense of confusion, even hallucinations, as they make their way through the swamp. The floating islands themselves are often deceptive. From a distance, they may appear solid and inviting, but stepping onto them can be an entirely different experience. Some explorers have reported sinking into the thick mat of vegetation, finding themselves trapped in the soggy mess beneath the surface. Once this happens, escape becomes nearly impossible. The dense, waterlogged mass of reeds and roots can quickly trap a person, and the shifting nature of the islands means that they may drift into areas where the current is strong or the waters are deep. Rescuers who attempt to retrieve bodies from the swamp often struggle with the same issues: dense vegetation, treacherous channels, and an ever-changing landscape that constantly shifts beneath their feet. One of the most notorious incidents occurred in the 1960s, when a group of Sudanese explorers disappeared without a trace while navigating the SUD. They were attempting to map the area and document the mysterious floating islands, but when their expedition failed to return, search teams were sent out to locate them. Despite extensive efforts, the group was never found, and the only clue to their fate was a scattered collection of equipment that was recovered several miles from the original camp. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened to them. Their disappearance added to the legend of the SUD, fueling the belief that something supernatural might be at play in the swamp. Some locals claim that the Sud is cursed, that it has a life of its own, and that it takes the lives of those who try to uncover its secrets. While the swamp's floating islands are often seen as its most dangerous feature, the Sud's unpredictability and hidden perils make it a deadly place for any explorer. The swamp's shifting islands, unrelenting currents, and dangerous wildlife combine to form an environment that is nearly impossible to survive without expert knowledge of the region. Even those who are familiar with the Sud can fall victim to its unpredictable nature. The local communities who live on the outskirts of the Sud have learned to navigate the swamp's dangers over generations, but even they know that the Sud can claim a life in the blink of an eye. In recent years, a growing number of adventurers and scientists have become drawn to the Sud once again. While the allure of the unknown is powerful, the dangers of the swamp are not to be taken lightly. Many have attempted to study the floating islands in greater detail, hoping to uncover the secrets that lie beneath their shifting surfaces. However, as we have seen time and time again, the Sud is a place that resists human understanding. It is an environment where the land itself seems to move, and where the very islands on which one might walk can disappear without a trace. The Sud will continue to lure explorers, but whether anyone can truly solve its mysteries remains to be seen. The shifting death traps of the Sud will likely continue to claim lives, ensuring that the swamp remains one of the most dangerous and unexplained regions on Earth. The spinning island of Argentina, the Eye. The perfectly circular floating island that moves on its own. Is it a natural wonder or something more mysterious? The story of the Eye, as it is commonly referred to, is one of the most curious and debated phenomena in the world. Located in Argentina's remote marshlands, this floating island is unlike anything seen elsewhere. Unlike the shifting islands of the Sud or the enigmatic ones of Loktak Lake, the Eye is a perfect circle, distinctively different from its surroundings. It is an island that defies all logic, moving across the waters seemingly under its own power, and its discovery and subsequent mysteries have sparked widespread fascination. But is it a natural wonder of geography, or is there something far stranger at play here? The Eye, located in the wetlands of the Paraná River Delta, was first noticed by locals in the early 20th century, though it wasn't until the 1960s that its peculiarities began to gain international attention. What makes this island so intriguing is not only its shape, a near-perfect circle with a diameter of around 100 meters, but the fact that it has been observed to spin, sometimes very slowly, and at other times with a surprising velocity. What makes its motion even more remarkable is that it appears to be entirely self-contained. It doesn't simply float with the current of the river, as one might expect of a regular island. Instead, it moves of its own accord, rotating on an axis as if it is following an unseen force. Initial explanations for the movement of the island centered around natural forces. Some suggested that the circular shape of the island might cause it to rotate, as it was carried along by river currents, but this failed to explain the slow, controlled nature of the motion. It wasn't merely drifting with the tide. It was as if the island itself was alive, turning with a purpose. Experts have debated this phenomenon for decades, but no clear consensus has emerged. For many years it was dismissed as an odd curiosity, a strange but harmless anomaly in nature. But when reports began to surface of the island's motion changing unpredictably, speeding up or slowing down without any obvious reason. Some started to question if this was merely a natural oddity. To understand why the eye's movement is so baffling, it's important to first consider the island's composition. The island itself is made up of a thick mat of reeds, grass, and mud, but it is unlike any other floating island in the world. The structure of the island, in particular the perfectly round shape, suggests a certain geometric precision, one that doesn't seem to fit with natural processes. Typically, floating islands are formed by the accumulation of vegetation, sometimes resulting in irregular or fragmented shapes. But the eye's perfect circularity raises immediate questions about its formation. How could such an island form naturally with such precision? And more curiously, why does it spin? Over the years, various hypotheses have been put forward to explain the eye's movement. One theory suggests that it could be a form of vegetation known as floating peat, which is buoyant enough to float on the surface of the water. The swirling currents and wind patterns in the Paraná River Delta could be strong enough to cause a floating peat island to rotate in place. However, this explanation does not adequately account for the perfect circularity of the island and its seemingly independent motion. It also does not explain why the island occasionally seems to accelerate or slow down in a manner that defies the natural flow of the river. Another theory posits that the island's rotation is caused by the unique topography of the region. The Paraná River Delta is known for its complex network of channels, constantly shifting due to seasonal flooding and other water movement patterns. Could it be that the shifting waters cause the island to move in such a way that its circular shape allows it to spin with the current? While this is a plausible explanation, it doesn't fully address the mystery of the island's sudden changes in speed and direction, nor does it explain why the island's center remains stable while the outer edges appear to be moving. Some have gone further, suggesting that the spinning island is not a naturally occurring phenomenon at all. Instead, they propose that the eye is a man-made creation, perhaps an ancient artifact, or even some form of unknown technology. This theory has become popular among those who believe that the island's motion and perfect circularity are too precise to be attributed to natural forces alone. Some argue that the island could be an ancient device left behind by an advanced civilization, possibly even extraterrestrial in origin. While this idea sounds far-fetched to most, it has captured the imaginations of those who are looking for explanations beyond the conventional. Adding to the island's mystique is the fact that it is incredibly difficult to reach. The Paraná River Delta is a remote, largely uninhabited region, and accessing the eye requires navigating a dense, swampy environment that is difficult to traverse. The terrain is full of hidden channels and shifting waterways, making any journey to the island both dangerous and time-consuming. The eye itself is located in a particularly isolated area, making it even more elusive. As a result, very few people have had the opportunity to get close to the island, and those who have are often left with more questions than answers. Moreover, sightings of the eye are sporadic. Some years, it appears to be more active, with reports of its movement becoming more frequent, while in other years, it seems to disappear altogether, as if hiding from view. Its erratic behavior has led many to speculate that there may be some kind of external force acting on the island, causing it to move in unpredictable ways. Could there be a geological explanation for the eye's movement? Perhaps some sort of shifting tectonic activity or underwater currents that cause the island to spin? Or is there something more mysterious at work? The natural environment around the eye also contributes to its allure. The Paraná River Delta is home to a variety of unique ecosystems, with lush vegetation, diverse wildlife, and constantly shifting water levels. The region is prone to flooding, and the constant movement of water throughout the delta could be responsible for some of the strange behavior of the eye. But many questions remain unanswered. Does the eye move because of the interplay between water, wind, and the island's vegetation? Or does something more profound influence its motion? A curious aspect of the eye's behavior is the impact it has on the local population. Indigenous communities who live in and around the Paraná River Delta have long held stories and legends about the floating island. For centuries, they have passed down tales of strange occurrences surrounding the eye, including accounts of its unusual motion and mysterious presence. To these communities, the eye is not just a physical object, but something imbued with deeper meaning. It is often viewed as a symbol of nature's power, a reminder of forces beyond human comprehension. Some locals believe that the eye has a spiritual significance, that its movement is tied to the ebb and flow of the world's energies, while others fear its power, viewing it as a harbinger of disaster. The idea of the eye as a mystical or supernatural force has been echoed by some explorers and researchers who have ventured into the region to study the phenomenon. Despite modern technology and scientific inquiry, the eye remains an enigma. Many attempts to study the island in more detail have been thwarted by the difficult conditions of the delta and the island's elusive nature. Even satellite images of the eye are often blurry, and attempts to measure the island's motion using drones or other high-tech equipment have met with limited success. The eye's origins remain unclear, and its continued existence only adds to the intrigue. Is it a natural formation, a fluke of geography, or something far stranger? The mystery of the spinning island has fascinated scientists, adventurers, and spiritual seekers alike for decades, and it shows no signs of losing its hold on the human imagination. What is it that makes this island so unique? What secrets does it hold beneath its seemingly tranquil surface? The answers to these questions remain elusive, and the eye continues to spin on, a perfect moving enigma in the heart of Argentina's wild delta. As the mystery of the eye persists, one cannot help but delve deeper into its possible origins and what they could reveal about the nature of this curious phenomenon. Could the spinning island be the key to understanding something much larger than itself? Theories continue to circulate, but what is certain is that its strange characteristics are far from a simple natural occurrence. To start, it is worth considering the incredible difficulty in reaching the island. As mentioned, the Paraná River Delta is a vast, swampy region. Most of the delta consists of dense, impenetrable vegetation and a maze of water channels that shift unpredictably. The terrain is not only difficult to traverse, but also hazardous. Navigating these waters requires specialized knowledge and equipment, and even then, it is not uncommon for adventurers to become disoriented or lost. This isolation has meant that only a few explorers have ventured into the heart of the delta to get a closer look at the island, and as a result, the majority of our knowledge about the eye remains pieced together from second-hand accounts, satellite images, and folklore. Interestingly, reports from the few who have managed to reach the island vary dramatically, adding further confusion to its mystery. Some claim to have observed the island spinning slowly, with its outer edges rotating while its center remains eerily still. Others report seeing the island spin faster, almost violently, as if caught in the grip of an unseen force. These inconsistencies raise questions about whether the island's motion is random, or whether there are external factors influencing its behavior. It could be that the island's movements align with specific environmental conditions, such as changes in wind patterns, water currents, or pressure systems that are unique to this particular area. But if the motion were solely due to these natural factors, wouldn't other similar islands in the region display comparable behavior? Another area that adds to the mystery is the perfect circularity of the eye. Geometric patterns in nature are rare, but not impossible. However, perfect symmetry such as this is almost unheard of. In natural environments, even circular objects or formations tend to be somewhat irregular, shaped by the forces acting upon them over time. It would seem improbable for such a perfect shape to form naturally, especially when the forces acting on floating islands are unpredictable. Some scientists suggest that the circle could be the result of the way the vegetation on the island grows, potentially influenced by the specific hydrological conditions of the area. But this does not satisfactorily explain how the island could maintain such perfect symmetry over time. The island's composition adds further intrigue. It is made up of a dense layer of vegetation, including reeds, grasses, and mud. This floating mat, while similar to the one found in other floating islands around the world, is particularly thick and buoyant. It seems almost too perfect, as though it were carefully designed or constructed. Could it be that the island is not a naturally occurring phenomenon, but something that was created deliberately, either by humans or perhaps even by a mysterious unknown force? While most of the scientific community has remained cautious, some individuals speculate that the eye could be a product of ancient human engineering, an artifact that was once part of a long-lost civilization. Evidence of ancient civilizations that are far older than previously believed continues to surface across the globe, with many such findings defying the accepted historical narrative. Could this floating island be a relic of such a forgotten age? Some theorists propose that the eye might even be a type of energy-conducting device, possibly constructed to harness the unique energies of the river delta, though there is little evidence to support this claim. What is more plausible is that the island is the result of some natural event or process that humans do not yet fully understand. Some even propose the idea that the island is the result of extraterrestrial influence. Theories about alien technology on Earth have been floating around for decades, and the eye has earned its spot in the annals of such mysteries. According to this line of thinking, the perfect symmetry, the island's motion, and its isolated location could all be clues pointing to an extraterrestrial origin. However, this theory has yet to gain traction in the scientific community, mainly because it lacks substantial evidence. That said, the island's unusual characteristics continue to fuel the imaginations of those willing to entertain such possibilities. Interestingly, the behavior of the eye might also be tied to the unique geology of the Paraná River Delta. The region is known for its geological activity, with large shifts occurring along fault lines and riverbeds. Could it be that the island is somehow influenced by underground forces, like tectonic movements or seismic shifts? The movement of the island could, in this scenario, be the result of subtle but powerful forces acting on it from below the surface, shifting it in such a way that it appears to rotate on its own. While this is a more grounded explanation than the extraterrestrial theory, it still does not fully address why the island seems to move with such purpose or unpredictability. The local communities who live in and around the Paraná River Delta offer a different perspective on the spinning island. They have long regarded the eye with a sense of awe and reverence. For generations, indigenous tribes have shared stories of the island's strange behavior, passing down legends about its origins and the supernatural forces that are thought to govern its movements. Some locals believe that the island is a living entity, with its own consciousness, capable of moving as it sees fit. In their eyes, the eye is not just a natural wonder, but a sacred object, imbued with spiritual significance. These beliefs are deeply rooted in the local culture, and many people in the region view the island as a symbol of nature's power and mystery. There are those who claim that the eye is not a permanent fixture of the region, but rather something that occasionally appears and disappears over time. While this idea might sound far-fetched, there are reports of the island being spotted one year and then vanishing entirely the next. Could it be that the island is not stationary at all, but rather moves along a hidden path, with only certain places along the delta able to host it at particular times? Some researchers have suggested that the island could be part of a larger, unexplored system of interconnected floating islands, and that its motion is just a piece of a much larger and more complex ecosystem. Despite the various theories, the truth about the eye remains elusive. What is certain, however, is that the spinning island continues to captivate the minds of those who encounter it. Its motion, its shape, and its very existence defy easy explanation. While many seek answers, others are content to marvel at its beauty and wonder. The eye is a mystery that has stood the test of time, and its secrets may never fully be revealed. Whether it is a natural wonder, an ancient artifact, or something entirely different, it remains an enigma, a reminder that not all mysteries can be solved, and some are better left to the imagination. The pumice rafts of the Pacific. Volcanic eruptions, creating floating rock islands the size of cities. What happens when an entire landmass drifts through the ocean? The Pacific Ocean, vast and mysterious, has long been home to some of the most incredible natural phenomena on Earth. Among these is the phenomenon of pumice rafts, massive floating islands formed by volcanic eruptions that can drift across the ocean like entire land masses. These floating rock islands, some of which are the size of entire cities, raise the question, what happens when an entire landmass drifts through the ocean? How does this incredible formation come to be, and what impact does it have on the ocean's ecosystem, the creatures that inhabit it, and the people who encounter it? To begin understanding the pumice rafts, we must first look at the volcanic activity that causes them. Pumice is a type of volcanic rock formed during explosive volcanic eruptions. Unlike most rocks, pumice is highly porous, with a structure full of air bubbles. This porosity makes pumice incredibly light, allowing it to float on water. The process that creates pumice is fascinating, and occurs when magma is rapidly cooled during an eruption. As the magma is blasted into the air, the gases trapped inside create a foam-like texture, and when it cools quickly, it solidifies into the light, porous rock known as pumice. In most volcanic eruptions, pumice is just one of the many byproducts, often floating around in small pieces. However, In some rare and extreme eruptions, massive amounts of pumice are expelled, creating large floating rafts that can cover vast stretches of the ocean. These rafts can range from small patches to enormous swaths of floating rock, sometimes hundreds of miles in size. The largest known pumice raft, which was discovered in 2019, covered an area larger than some small countries, a true testament to the scale of volcanic activity that can occur in the Pacific. The eruption that created the 2019 pumice raft originated from a volcanic island in the Tonga archipelago, a region in the South Pacific that is known for its intense volcanic activity. This eruption unleashed such an extraordinary amount of pumice that it quickly formed a raft large enough to be seen from space. The raft was so large that it actually became a floating island in its own right, drifting through the ocean with the tides and currents. Within weeks, it had drifted thousands of miles away from its point of origin, affecting the surrounding marine environment in ways that researchers were only beginning to understand. As these pumice rafts drift across the ocean, they do not just remain empty masses of rock. In fact, they can become mobile ecosystems in their own right. The porous nature of pumice makes it an ideal surface for colonization by various organisms. Over time, seaweed, barnacles, and other marine life attach themselves to the floating rocks. In some cases, the pumice rafts become home to a variety of creatures, from small fish to larger marine mammals, who use the floating mass as a temporary habitat during their travels. Birds, too, can be seen resting on the pumice, taking advantage of the raft as a safe place to perch and search for food. The ecosystem that forms around these pumice rafts is dynamic, and scientists have only begun to study how it functions. The migration of pumice rafts across the ocean also has significant ecological implications. The creatures that colonize these rafts can end up being transported across vast distances. This has led to the spread of species to new regions, a process known as long-distance dispersal. The movement of pumice rafts is one way in which marine species can colonize previously uninhabited areas or expand their ranges. The rafting of marine life on pumice is not a new phenomenon. It has been observed for centuries. However, the scale of recent eruptions and the size of the pumice rafts they produce have raised new questions about how this process might affect biodiversity and ecosystems on a global scale. In addition to its ecological impact, pumice rafts also hold significance for human activity. For sailors and ships navigating the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, these floating rock islands can present unexpected hazards. While pumice is not as hard or dense as other types of rock, large rafts can still cause problems for vessels. For one, the sheer size of some of these rafts means that they can cover significant stretches of the ocean. A ship could easily encounter a raft unexpectedly, and in some cases, pumice pieces have been known to cause damage to boat propellers or even clog up the engines of smaller vessels. Mariners have been aware of these potential dangers for centuries, but the growing size of pumice rafts in recent decades has made them an increasing concern. The movement of these pumice rafts also raises questions about the long-term impact they may have on the world's oceans. As these large masses of rock drift, they can affect local ocean currents and the distribution of nutrients. While pumice is light and allows for the movement of water beneath it, large rafts can still block sunlight from reaching deeper layers of the ocean, which can disrupt the balance of ecosystems that rely on sunlight for photosynthesis. Additionally, pumice rafts can act as barriers, altering the flow of water and possibly affecting the migration patterns of marine species. In this way, pumice rafts can have a profound impact on the health of marine environments, especially in regions where they accumulate in large numbers. Another important aspect of pumice rafts is their connection to climate change. Volcanic eruptions, while being natural events, can have a significant effect on the atmosphere and the climate. The massive amount of volcanic ash and gases released during eruptions can affect weather patterns and even contribute to global cooling in some cases. The creation of pumice rafts adds another layer to this phenomenon. As pumice rafts float through the ocean, they can interact with the climate in unexpected ways. For example, large rafts may affect ocean temperatures by insulating the water beneath them, potentially altering the conditions that affect marine life. This could have consequences for fisheries, ocean circulation, and the overall health of the oceans. There are also more speculative concerns regarding the potential for pumice rafts to become a source of natural disaster. In some cases, the shifting of these massive floating islands could have unforeseen consequences for coastal regions. A large pumice raft, if it were to get caught in a strong current or under certain wind conditions, could impact coastal areas, causing localized flooding or erosion. Furthermore, the increasing frequency of large volcanic eruptions in the Pacific raises questions about whether pumice rafts could become a more common feature in the region's oceans. Should this happen, it could have significant effects on both marine life and human infrastructure along the Pacific's coasts. Despite the many uncertainties surrounding pumice rafts, one thing is clear. They are a striking example of the dynamic forces that shape our planet. From their dramatic volcanic origins to their role in the global ecosystem, pumice rafts are a reminder of the unpredictable power of nature. They not only present a unique challenge to the creatures and humans who encounter them, but also offer a glimpse into the complexity and interconnectivity of the natural world. As scientists continue to study pumice rafts and their ecological impact, the full scope of their influence on the world's oceans may become clearer. Until then, the mystery of these floating rock islands continues to intrigue and amaze all those who come into contact with them. As we explore further into the mystery of pumice rafts, it becomes clear that these floating rock islands have had a lasting impact on the ocean's environment, ecosystems, and even human history. Beyond the volcanic eruption that creates them, pumice rafts represent something far more complex. Their journey across the Pacific Ocean offers both challenges and opportunities for the planet's natural world, often in surprising ways. Once pumice rafts are formed, their journey across the ocean is influenced by several key factors: ocean currents, wind patterns, and the sheer size of the raft itself. Pumice rafts can travel vast distances, as was the case in 2019, when a pumice raft covered an area of over 40 square miles. These rafts can drift across the Pacific Ocean for months or even years. Depending on the eruption's location, some rafts have been found thousands of miles from their point of origin. One of the most fascinating aspects of pumice rafts is their ability to float for extended periods, a feature unique to their composition. This ability allows them to act as drifting islands, carrying with them marine life and organic material, sometimes in a nearly self-sustaining manner. As these rafts move, they serve as both a shelter and a corridor for marine life. Organisms that are caught on the raft during its formation may find a temporary home on the pumice's porous surface, while other creatures may use the raft as a transit point. Some marine species, including fish, crabs, and even sea turtles, are known to hitch a ride on pumice rafts, potentially using the raft as a route to new, uncharted territories. This phenomenon, known as marine rafting, has been observed for centuries, but the pumice rafts of the Pacific represent one of the most significant forms of this phenomenon due to their size, duration, and mobility. Interestingly, the colonization of pumice by marine species is not just a simple act of survival for the creatures involved. It plays a role in the broader ecological movement of species across oceanic barriers. For example, certain species of coral polyps and barnacles are known to travel with pumice rafts, finding new habitats to colonize. These organisms may have otherwise been restricted to specific regions of the ocean, but by hitching a ride on a floating island, they gain access to new environments and ecosystems. In some cases, this can lead to the expansion of species ranges, resulting in the introduction of new marine life to areas that previously had no such inhabitants. However, this movement of species does not come without consequences. The introduction of foreign species to new environments can be both beneficial and harmful. While some species may thrive in their new habitat, others may become invasive, outcompeting local species for resources. This is particularly true in areas where ecosystems are fragile, such as remote islands or coral reefs. The arrival of new species, transported by pumice rafts, could have unintended consequences that disrupt the balance of local food chains and marine ecosystems. The ecological impact of pumice rafts on a global scale is still an area of active research, and scientists are increasingly concerned with the long-term consequences of these floating islands transporting life across the oceans. The movement of pumice rafts also provides scientists with a valuable opportunity to study ocean currents and climate patterns. As these large floating masses drift through the Pacific, they act as markers, revealing how ocean currents work and how they may be changing over time. In fact, pumice rafts have been used as natural tracers for oceanographers studying the movement of water across vast distances. By tracking the progress of a pumice raft, researchers can gather crucial data about currents, wind patterns, and even the temperature of the ocean at different depths. This helps scientists better understand the complex dynamics of the Earth's climate system, as well as how volcanic eruptions can influence atmospheric conditions and global weather. The data collected from pumice rafts can also be used to predict the potential effects of climate change on ocean circulation. As the Earth's temperature rises, ocean currents are expected to change, potentially disrupting the distribution of marine life. By studying the movement of pumice rafts and the species that travel with them, scientists can gain insight into how marine ecosystems might respond to these changes. For example, shifts in ocean currents could cause some species to migrate to new areas, altering the distribution of marine life and potentially impacting fisheries and human economies that depend on the ocean for sustenance. Another important factor in understanding pumice rafts is their role in the larger geological context of the Pacific Ocean. The region is home to the Ring of Fire, a chain of volcanic islands and tectonic activity that accounts for much of the Earth's volcanic eruptions. While pumice rafts are a fascinating byproduct of volcanic activity, they are not the only feature created by eruptions in this region. Submarine volcanoes, seafloor spreading, and hydrothermal vents are just a few other geological phenomena that shape the Pacific's ecosystem. Pumice rafts, however, provide a rare and visible link between the Earth's molten core and the ocean's surface, offering a tangible example of how volcanic activity can shape the marine environment. The process by which pumice rafts drift across the ocean also has implications for their role in disaster preparedness and maritime safety. While the floating rocks themselves are not inherently dangerous, their presence can pose a risk to shipping and navigation. The size of some pumice rafts, particularly those formed by large eruptions, can be enough to obstruct the path of ships. Pumice can even clog the cooling systems of large vessels, causing engines to overheat or malfunction. Additionally, large floating rafts can create temporary barriers, blocking shipping routes or hindering access to important ports. Mariners navigating these areas must be aware of the potential hazards posed by pumice, particularly after large volcanic eruptions, when rafts are most likely to form. Despite the challenges pumice rafts pose, they also represent a unique opportunity for exploration and scientific study. In recent years, researchers have made significant strides in studying pumice and its role in the ocean ecosystem. As technology advances, scientists are able to track pumice rafts more accurately and investigate their effects on the environment with greater precision. Some researchers are even studying the possibility of using pumice as a tool for mitigating climate change. The natural ability of pumice to absorb carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas, has sparked interest in the potential for using pumice in carbon capture technology. While this idea is still in the early stages of development, it presents a novel way of utilizing pumice's natural properties for environmental benefit. In conclusion, pumice rafts are more than just fascinating geological phenomena. They are living ecosystems, mobile carriers of marine life, and key players in the complex workings of the Pacific Ocean. Whether they are transporting species across the ocean, influencing climate patterns, or posing challenges to maritime safety, pumice rafts continue to intrigue and perplex scientists and explorers alike. From their explosive volcanic origins to their unpredictable, wandering journeys across the ocean, pumice rafts serve as a reminder of the immense power of nature and the fragile interconnectedness of life on Earth. As scientists continue to unravel the mysteries of pumice rafts and their environmental impact, it is clear that these floating islands will remain one of the Pacific's most remarkable and enigmatic features. The man-made floating islands of the Uros, a civilization that built floating islands to escape danger. How do these islands work, and why are they still used today? Nestled high in the Andes, on the shimmering waters of Lake Titicaca, there exists a marvel of human ingenuity and resilience, the man-made floating islands of the Uros. These islands, which have been constructed and inhabited by the Uros people for centuries, defy the natural order of land and water, offering a unique solution to one of the most challenging environments in the world. But these islands aren't just a curious anomaly. They are the result of a sophisticated adaptation, born from necessity and a desire for survival. So, how exactly do these floating islands work? And why are they still used by the Uros people today? The history of the Uros is as fascinating as the islands themselves. The Uros people are believed to be one of the oldest civilizations in the Andean region, with origins dating back over 3,000 years. Long before the arrival of the Incas and the Spanish conquistadors, the Uros had established a unique way of life on the expansive waters of Lake Titicaca, the highest navigable lake in the world. This isolated and harsh environment, surrounded by high mountains and subject to extreme temperatures, posed serious challenges to anyone trying to settle in the region. The Uros, however, managed to thrive by creating their own floating islands, allowing them to navigate the lake and avoid conflicts with neighboring civilizations. The reason for this migration to the waters can be traced to the need for protection and autonomy. The Uros people were historically persecuted and pushed into the lakes by the expanding Inca Empire, which sought to consolidate its territory. By building floating islands, the Uros could escape the oppression of more powerful neighbors, using the lake's vast expanse as both a natural shield and a way of maintaining their independence. But how do these islands work, and what makes them so unique? The construction of the islands is nothing short of extraordinary. At the core of each island is a buoyant foundation made from bundles of totora reeds, which grow abundantly in the shallow waters of Lake Titicaca. The totora reeds, which are strong, flexible, and naturally buoyant, serve as the foundation for the island's structure, creating a floating platform that can support homes, boats, and even entire communities. To build an island, the Uros first harvest the totora reeds, cutting them into manageable lengths. They then weave the reeds together, layering them on top of each other, and anchor them to the lake bed with ropes and stakes made from the same reeds. This layering process continues for several months, as the island slowly grows in size. Once the foundation is solid, and the island has enough space for a family or group, the Uros construct their homes, which are also made from reeds. These reed homes are surprisingly sturdy and well-suited to the challenging conditions of the lake, offering insulation from the cold, protection from the elements, and natural ventilation. One of the most remarkable aspects of these floating islands is their maintenance. Because the totora reeds are constantly exposed to the water, they naturally decay over time. To prevent their islands from sinking or becoming unstable, the Uros regularly replace the top layers of reeds, ensuring that their homes and communities remain afloat. This process requires skill, knowledge, and a deep understanding of the lake's ecosystem. Over time, the Uros have perfected this method, creating floating islands that have lasted for generations. But the Uros don't just build their islands for shelter. The floating islands serve a variety of purposes. Each island is a self-contained microcosm of Uros life, with homes, community spaces, and even schools and stores. The islands are designed for maximum efficiency, with everything arranged in a way that promotes sustainability and communal living. On the islands, the Uros grow crops like potatoes and quinoa, and raise livestock such as llamas and alpacas. The totora reeds are also used for a variety of purposes beyond construction, including making boats, mats, and even food. The Uros have found ingenious ways to live off the land and water, creating a lifestyle that balances harmony with the harsh natural environment around them. The islands are also a reflection of the Uros people's deep connection to their environment. The Uros have long practiced sustainable fishing, harvesting the abundant fish and birds of the lake, and using the reeds for a variety of crafts and tools. The lake itself is a sacred space for the Uros, and they believe that their connection to the water is integral to their identity as a people. The floating islands are a symbol of this connection, embodying both their ingenuity and their cultural heritage. Despite the challenges posed by the changing world around them, the Uros have managed to preserve their way of life. Today, their floating islands continue to be inhabited by several communities, and the Uros people remain one of the few groups in the world who still live on these extraordinary islands. However, modern pressures are beginning to take their toll. The rise of tourism, environmental changes, and the encroachment of modern infrastructure on Lake Titicaca threaten the Uros' way of life. The once pristine waters of the lake have been polluted by urban development, and the totora reeds, crucial to the Euro's survival, are becoming increasingly scarce. Yet, despite these challenges, the Euros remain determined to maintain their floating islands, adapting to the changing world while staying true to their traditions. Today, the floating islands are not just a testament to the resilience of the Euros people, but also a symbol of their enduring connection to the land, water, and their ancestors. The islands have become a source of cultural pride, attracting visitors from around the world who come to marvel at this incredible feat of human creativity. The Euros have also become an important part of the wider cultural landscape of the Andean region, serving as a living reminder of the ways in which human beings can adapt to even the most challenging environments. In the next part of this chapter, we will explore the challenges faced by the Euros today and how they continue to adapt and survive in the face of modern threats. We will examine the cultural significance of the islands and how the Euros are working to ensure that their remarkable way of life endures for future generations. The Euros people's floating islands stand as an enduring testament to human ingenuity, but they are not immune to the forces of modernity. In the first part of this chapter, we explored the remarkable history and unique construction of these islands. Now, we delve deeper into the challenges and adaptations that have shaped the Euros' continued survival. While their way of life is fascinating, it is increasingly under threat. Today, the Euros must contend with environmental pressures, economic shifts, and the modern world encroaching upon their time-honored traditions. One of the most immediate threats to the Euros' floating islands is the rapid depletion of totora reeds. Historically, these reeds have been abundant in Lake Titicaca's shallow waters, but as tourism has grown and urbanization has spread in the region, pollution and overharvesting have diminished their availability. Reeds, which are central to the island's construction and maintenance, are now harder to come by. The Euros are facing the real possibility of their very lifeblood, the reeds, becoming scarce. In some areas, they have to travel farther into the lake to harvest the totora, a task that consumes valuable time and resources. Furthermore, climate change is altering the dynamics of the lake itself. Rising temperatures have caused shifts in weather patterns, affecting the growth of totora reeds and making it more difficult for the Euros to rely on this once abundant natural resource. In response to these changes, the Euros have had to adapt their practices. Many communities have begun supplementing the totora reeds with synthetic materials for certain island repairs, though this compromises the traditional nature of the floating islands. While some Euros communities have embraced these changes as a necessary part of survival, others are fiercely committed to preserving their heritage, going to great lengths to use only natural materials for construction. The tension between tradition and necessity has created divisions within the Euros community, as some see modern materials as a way to secure the future of their islands, while others view them as a threat to their cultural identity. The pressure on the environment surrounding Lake Titicaca is not just limited to the reeds. The lake itself, which sustains the Euros and provides the foundation for their floating islands, has faced significant environmental degradation in recent years. Pollution, both from nearby cities and the influx of tourism, has contaminated the waters of the lake. Wastewater, garbage, and industrial runoff have led to the degradation of the delicate ecosystem. This pollution has harmed aquatic life, which the Euros rely on for food, and has contributed to the decline in the quality of the water that sustains their way of life. The toxic algae blooms that have become more frequent in the lake have had a devastating impact on fish populations, further threatening the Euros' traditional food sources. Despite these environmental challenges, the Euros continue to show resilience. In recent years, they have worked alongside environmental organizations to protect the lake and its fragile ecosystem. Through these collaborations, the Euros have participated in efforts to clean up the lake and raise awareness about the environmental issues facing the region. By blending their deep knowledge of the lake with modern conservation practices, the Euros are fighting to preserve both their culture and the environment that supports them. Another pressing challenge is the impact of tourism. While tourism has brought some economic benefits to the Euros, it has also introduced new challenges. Visitors from around the world come to witness the unique floating islands, but this influx of tourists has led to commercialization and the erosion of traditional ways of life. In some cases, Euros families have been forced to build more islands for tourists, turning their floating homes into attractions rather than places of genuine habitation. The rapid growth of tourism has also led to increased pollution in the lake, as the sheer volume of boats, trash, and human activity has put strain on the fragile environment. Yet, despite these pressures, the Euros have found ways to use tourism as a tool for cultural preservation. By opening their islands to visitors, they have been able to generate income and, in some cases, invest in the maintenance of their traditional ways of life. The money earned from tourists often goes toward education, healthcare, and the upkeep of the floating islands. In some areas, Euros communities have started to offer guided tours, giving visitors a deeper understanding of their history, traditions, and way of life. This not only provides a sustainable source of income, but also helps preserve the cultural integrity of the Euros by allowing them to control how their traditions are presented to the world. The Euros' efforts to maintain their culture are not limited to the islands themselves. In recent years, the Euros have worked to revive their traditional language, which was at risk of disappearing. Through educational programs and cultural initiatives, younger generations of Euros are being taught their ancestral language, ensuring that their cultural heritage is passed down. This linguistic revival is crucial, as language is a key component of cultural identity. By preserving their language, the Euros are taking steps to ensure that their way of life will continue for future generations. Despite these efforts to adapt and survive, there are still significant obstacles on the horizon. The modern world's influence continues to encroach on the Euros' isolated existence. While the floating islands are a marvel of human ingenuity, they are not immune to the pressures of urbanization and industrialization. As nearby cities expand and tourism grows, the Euros are being drawn into the broader economic system, forcing them to navigate the delicate balance between tradition and progress. However, the Euros' resilience is undeniable. For over 3,000 years, they have managed to survive in one of the most difficult environments on Earth. Their ability to adapt and innovate, while preserving their unique cultural identity, is a testament to their strength and ingenuity. The floating islands of the Euros are not just a curiosity. They are a living example of human creativity in the face of adversity. As they continue to face modern challenges, the Euros' story remains a powerful reminder of the enduring power of culture, tradition, and the ability to adapt to an ever-changing world. In conclusion, the man-made floating islands of the Euros are not just a marvel of engineering, but also a symbol of human resilience and adaptability. While the Euros face significant challenges, they continue to fight for their survival and cultural preservation. The floating islands are not merely a relic of the past. They are a living testament to the ingenuity of a people who, for millennia, have defied the odds. As they navigate the complexities of modern life, the Euros people remain committed to their traditions, ensuring that their way of life endures for generations to come. Nature's accidental engineering. How peat, plant roots, and rising waters create islands that should not exist. The phenomenon of floating islands is a natural mystery that has fascinated scientists and adventurers alike for centuries. These are not islands in the traditional sense. They are not solid land masses rising from the sea or lakes, but rather precarious collections of plant material, peat and roots, drifting on water like islands of life, suspended in a vast liquid wilderness. What's most astonishing about floating islands is that they seem almost impossible. How can large masses of earth and vegetation remain afloat? Why do they form in some places and not others? These questions have intrigued both nature enthusiasts and researchers, leading to the discovery of an incredible process that defies many of the principles of traditional land formation. Floating islands are typically found in lakes, rivers, and marshes, particularly in regions where wetlands or peat bogs exist. They appear to float on water, despite the apparent contradiction in the laws of physics. How can large, heavy masses of organic matter float, seemingly without sinking or collapsing under their own weight? The answer lies in the complex interaction between plant life, the water, and the processes that govern these environments. At the heart of floating island formation is peat, the accumulation of decayed organic matter, primarily plant material, in waterlogged conditions. Peat bogs are created in environments where decomposition is slower than plant growth, due to low oxygen levels in the water. As plants die, their organic material doesn't fully decompose. Over time, this dead plant matter builds up, forming a spongy, waterlogged mass. This dense layer of peat is vital in the formation of floating islands. Peat has the ability to trap air pockets within its structure, creating a material that is not only light, but buoyant. In essence, the very properties of peat allow it to float on the surface of water, forming islands that can be surprisingly stable and solid. However, peat alone isn't enough to create these floating masses. Plant roots play a crucial role in holding the structure together. Floating islands often begin as smaller, more fragile structures, where plant roots from aquatic species, such as reeds, grasses, and sedges, interlock with the peat and each other. These plants create a network of intertwined roots, holding the material together like a sponge. The roots anchor the floating mass to the water below, preventing it from drifting away too easily. Over time, this root system becomes denser, further stabilizing the island. The process of floating island creation starts in wetlands or marshy environments, where plants thrive in nutrient-rich, waterlogged soil. As water levels rise, whether from seasonal floods or long-term environmental changes, the root systems of these plants expand and intertwine, gradually forming a floating mat of plant material and peat. In some cases, floating islands have been found to be formed by the gradual shifting of plant matter, which grows outwards and outward from the shores. The waters surrounding the island keep the mass buoyant, while continuing to provide the nutrients necessary for plant growth. In certain cases, these islands can remain afloat for decades, slowly growing in size as more plants become rooted into the peat, strengthening the island. A notable example of this phenomenon can be observed in the famous floating islands of Lake Titicaca, home to the Euros people. These islands are built from the totora reeds, but the underlying process of formation still depends on the same principles. The totora reeds float on the water's surface, gradually accumulating over time into solid masses. What's unique about the floating islands on Lake Titicaca is that they are built intentionally by the Uros people, who harvest and maintain them. However, the natural processes that form floating islands are similarly reliant on plant growth and peat accumulation, with a key focus on the balance between water, plants, and nutrients. The floating islands of nature, however, are not as controlled. They are products of the environment's natural rhythms and conditions. The beauty of these islands lies in their fragility and their ever-changing nature. Some islands are temporary, lasting only a season before disintegrating as the water level fluctuates, or the vegetation can no longer hold the mass together. Others, however, can survive for decades or even centuries, continuously evolving as the plant matter and peat accumulate over time. Some floating islands are home to a unique array of flora and fauna that thrive in the ever-changing conditions of life on the water. These islands provide a stable habitat for various plant species, insects, and birds, creating micro-ecosystems that are unlike anything found on solid land. But floating islands are not just confined to wetland areas. In certain parts of the world, such as the Sud region in Sudan and the Everglades in the United States, vast floating mats of vegetation are regularly created by rising water levels. These floating mats, much like their counterparts in wetland areas, are made up of plant matter, peat, and roots, all held together by natural processes. These floating masses can sometimes cover large portions of the water's surface, providing unique ecosystems that serve as a habitat for countless species of birds and other animals. Floating islands don't simply appear overnight. Their creation is a gradual process, often taking years, decades, or even centuries to form. The conditions that create these islands are delicate and highly specific. Rising water levels, which may seem like an undesirable consequence of flooding, can actually trigger the formation of these floating ecosystems. In areas where flooding occurs seasonally, water levels that rise and fall create a dynamic environment where plant growth is accelerated. The roots of aquatic plants grow deeper as they adjust to the changing water levels, eventually building up layers of organic material that form the foundation for floating islands. The creation of floating islands is also closely linked to changes in the local environment. For instance, in areas where wetlands are shrinking or being drained for agricultural use, the process of floating island formation is disrupted. Human intervention in these ecosystems, whether for urban development, irrigation, or deforestation, can have a profound impact on the delicate balance required for floating islands to form. In some cases, human activities have altered the flow of water and the nutrient levels in wetlands, preventing the formation of floating islands altogether. One of the most intriguing aspects of floating islands is their ability to move. As plants grow and die, their roots continue to extend into the water, and the islands slowly shift across the surface. These floating masses can drift, sometimes over long distances, depending on the wind, water currents, and the amount of vegetation involved. It's not uncommon to find floating islands that have moved miles from their original location. Some of these islands even experience fragmentation, breaking off into smaller pieces that drift apart. This mobility gives floating islands an ephemeral, almost mystical quality, as they are constantly in flux, changing both in size and location. In the coming parts of this chapter, we will explore not just the physical mechanics of floating islands, but also the ecosystems they create and the unexpected role they play in the survival of plant and animal life. But first, we must examine the true extent of their impact. These islands, formed by nature's delicate balance, challenge our understanding of the environment. They make us reconsider how fragile and how resilient our ecosystems can be, all the while continuing to defy the natural order in surprising and mysterious ways. Now that we understand how floating islands are formed and the role of peat, plant roots, and rising waters in their creation, we can dive deeper into the broader implications of these mysterious landmasses. Floating islands are more than just remarkable natural curiosities. They play a crucial role in the ecosystems around them, and their presence has significant consequences for both the local environment and human populations. One of the most fascinating aspects of floating islands is their ability to act as mobile, floating ecosystems. As these islands drift across lakes, rivers, and marshes, they carry with them an entire world of plant and animal life. They provide stable habitats for species that thrive in the ever-changing conditions of life on the water. For instance, the plants that form the foundation of these floating islands are often home to numerous insect species, some of which may be endemic to these floating islands alone. This creates an isolated ecosystem where species can evolve and adapt uniquely, separate from the surrounding landmass. In some regions, floating islands host a variety of bird species, offering a nesting ground that may be more secure than the surrounding land, especially in areas prone to flooding or other natural disturbances. The isolated, mobile nature of floating islands means that they can sometimes provide refuge for species that need protection from predators or adverse environmental conditions. This protection extends to the plant life as well. The floating islands movement allows certain plants to escape the pressure of competition from larger rooted species on solid ground. The islands act as floating sanctuaries, where plants can continue to thrive in relative peace. Beyond the impact on local ecosystems, the presence of floating islands can alter the hydrodynamics of the bodies of water in which they float. As the islands drift across lakes, rivers, or marshes, they can change the flow of water beneath them. This movement can have both positive and negative effects. On the one hand, the islands help to slow down the flow of water, particularly in areas prone to strong currents. This reduction in speed can benefit plant and aquatic life by creating calmer, more stable environments where delicate species can flourish. On the other hand, the growth of large floating islands in areas with limited water flow can lead to the creation of stagnant water pockets beneath them, which can result in the accumulation of harmful substances such as toxins or pollutants. Floating islands can also play a role in the regulation of water temperature. As they cover parts of the water's surface, they provide shade, which helps to cool the water beneath. This can be crucial in regions where temperature fluctuations are extreme, and the cooling effect of the floating islands can help maintain a more stable environment for aquatic life. The cooling process can also help mitigate the effects of climate change, particularly in areas where rising water temperatures threaten the survival of certain species. However, the effects of floating islands are not entirely benign. As these islands drift across the water, they can sometimes become a hazard to boats, ships, and even local human populations. The mobility of floating islands means they can end up in unexpected places, blocking waterways or interfering with navigation. In regions where commercial shipping is important, the presence of large, drifting islands can create significant disruptions. Furthermore, in areas with high human populations, these islands can pose a risk to infrastructure, particularly in coastal or low-lying regions, where flooding is a regular concern. While the consequences of floating islands are often seen as a natural phenomenon, humans have learned to interact with them in ways that can either harness their benefits or mitigate their risks. Indigenous communities, such as the Uros people of Lake Titicaca, have long understood the value of floating islands. Over time, they have developed unique methods for building, maintaining, and using these floating masses to their advantage. The Uros have perfected the art of creating their own floating islands, constructing them from the totora reeds that grow abundantly in the waters of Lake Titicaca. These islands serve as both homes and sources of livelihood for the Uros people, providing them with shelter and a stable environment amidst the shifting waters. The Uros have developed sophisticated techniques for maintaining their islands, constantly replenishing the totora reeds to prevent their floating homes from disintegrating. These islands are not just static landforms, but living, evolving structures that require constant care. The Uros people's ability to adapt to the shifting nature of the islands is a testament to their resilience and resourcefulness. In this sense, the floating islands of Lake Titicaca are not only a natural curiosity, but a vital part of a sustainable way of life for the Uros. But while floating islands may seem like a peaceful coexistence between nature and humans, they also raise questions about the balance between human activity and the environment. As populations grow and land is increasingly reclaimed for agriculture or development, the delicate ecosystems of floating islands are threatened. Human activity, particularly deforestation and pollution, can disrupt the balance of the wetlands that give rise to these islands. Climate change, too, presents a looming threat. Rising temperatures and unpredictable water levels can destabilize the fragile environment in which floating islands thrive, leading to a decline in their formation and a loss of the species that depend on them. In some regions, particularly in parts of Africa, floating islands are not just ecological marvels, but sources of mystery and intrigue. In the Sud region of Sudan, massive floating islands have been discovered in swamps and marshlands, drifting across the vast expanses of the Nile. These islands, often composed of layers of vegetation, can be as large as small towns, and their movement across the water is nothing short of awe-inspiring. The Sud is a vast, watery wilderness, and the floating islands that appear there are a direct result of the unique hydrological conditions of the area. They provide critical habitats for countless species of birds, fish, and plants, helping to maintain the biodiversity of the region. However, their mobility also means that they are in constant flux, and the unpredictability of their movement can be both a blessing and a curse for local wildlife and human communities. The future of floating islands is uncertain. While they continue to provide vital ecological functions, they also face increasing pressures from climate change, human activity, and environmental degradation. Scientists are studying these natural wonders to better understand their role in the environment and their potential to help mitigate the impacts of climate change. As more floating islands are discovered in remote regions of the world, the mystery of their formation and the consequences of their movement will continue to intrigue researchers, explorers, and environmentalists alike. In the end, floating islands are a reminder of the power of nature's resilience and adaptability. They challenge our understanding of what is possible in the natural world, showing us that the boundaries between land and water are not always as clear as we once believed. These islands, formed by a delicate balance of plant life, water, and time, offer a glimpse into the complex web of life that exists in the world's most dynamic ecosystems. As we continue to explore and understand the floating islands of the world, we gain a deeper appreciation for the forces that shape our planet and the mysteries that still lie beneath the surface. Forests on water. How entire floating forests grow on lakes and move as if alive. In some of the world's most mysterious and remote locations, there exist remarkable ecosystems that seem to defy the laws of nature. These are the floating forests, vast clusters of vegetation that grow not on solid ground, but on the water's surface. These living forests are an astonishing natural wonder, often appearing to drift and move as though alive, with ecosystems that grow, change, and even relocate across the surface of lakes and rivers. While the phenomenon may sound surreal, floating forests are very much a real and essential part of the world's wetlands, offering a fascinating glimpse into the resilience of nature. Floating forests are made up of dense clusters of vegetation that have developed a unique ability to thrive on the water's surface. But how do these plants survive without any solid earth to anchor them? The answer lies in their specialized adaptations. Floating forests form in areas where certain conditions, namely, a combination of shallow water, high plant growth, and specific types of vegetation, are present. These conditions, while rare, exist in places around the world, from the swamps of the Amazon to lakes in Southeast Asia. They are a direct result of an intricate interplay between water, plants, and the environment. The formation of floating forests begins with an accumulation of organic material, such as dead plant matter, peat, and mud, on the surface of a lake or marsh. Over time, this material becomes buoyant, creating a platform that can support the growth of plants. In the right conditions, this platform is colonized by vegetation, often beginning with aquatic plants that are capable of withstanding the fluctuating water levels. As these plants grow and die, they build up layers of organic matter, which further supports the growth of larger plants. Eventually, this leads to the formation of thick mats of vegetation that can support entire forests. The key to the survival of floating forests lies in the specialized adaptations of the plants that call them home. The vegetation found on floating forests is typically made up of a combination of aquatic and semi-aquatic plants, each uniquely suited to life on water. These plants often have buoyant or flexible structures that allow them to float or withstand shifting water levels. The roots of these plants are not anchored to the soil, but instead dangle freely in the water, allowing them to absorb nutrients and oxygen directly from the water. This adaptation gives the plants the ability to survive in areas with little or no soil. One of the most famous examples of floating forests is found in the vast wetlands of the Amazon River basin. The Amazon's flooded forests, known as Igapo, are a prime example of this phenomenon. During the wet season, large portions of the forest are submerged under water, and the trees and plants that grow in these areas have adapted to life on the water's surface. The floating mats of vegetation created in these areas are a vital part of the ecosystem, providing shelter and food for countless species of wildlife. The Igapo forests are not only home to numerous fish, amphibians, and reptiles, but also serve as a crucial breeding ground for many species of birds. In addition to their ecological importance, floating forests also play a significant role in the global water cycle. The thick mats of vegetation help to slow down the flow of water, acting as natural filters that trap sediment and pollutants. This helps to purify the water and maintain the health of surrounding ecosystems. Furthermore, the roots of the plants that make up the floating forests help to stabilize the soil beneath them, preventing erosion and ensuring the continued survival of the wetland. Floating forests are not confined to tropical regions. In parts of North America and Europe, similar ecosystems can be found in temperate and boreal climates. The Great Lakes, for example, are home to floating mats of vegetation that support entire ecosystems of plants, fish, and birds. In these areas, the floating forests may not be as vast or dense as those in tropical regions, but they still play a crucial role in maintaining the health of the surrounding environment. While the phenomenon of floating forests is well documented, their movement and the way they interact with their environment remain a subject of ongoing research and mystery. One of the most fascinating aspects of floating forests is their ability to move across the surface of lakes and rivers. Unlike stationary, land-based forests, floating forests are mobile ecosystems that can drift with the water's currents, wind, and seasonal changes. This mobility allows them to explore new areas, expanding their reach and creating new habitats for the plants and animals that live on them. However, the movement of these forests is not always predictable. The plants and vegetation that form the forests can be carried long distances, shifting with the seasons and even breaking apart in extreme weather conditions. In some cases, floating forests can even become fragmented, breaking into smaller islands of vegetation that drift independently. These smaller islands can travel across the water, carried by the wind or water currents, and establish new floating ecosystems wherever they land. This mobility gives floating forests an almost otherworldly quality, as if they are alive, shifting and adapting to their surroundings in response to changes in the environment. One particularly fascinating aspect of floating forests is how they interact with other ecosystems. Floating forests can create microclimates on the water's surface, altering temperature, humidity, and light conditions. This creates a unique environment where species that are not typically found in surrounding areas can thrive. The floating islands can act as floating sanctuaries, providing a safe haven for animals and plants that might otherwise be at risk of extinction in other areas. In some cases, the plants on floating islands have evolved in isolation from their terrestrial counterparts, creating new, distinct species that are perfectly adapted to life on the water. Despite the relative isolation of floating forests, they are not immune to the impacts of human activity. Climate change, deforestation, and pollution all pose significant threats to these fragile ecosystems. Rising temperatures and changing water levels can disrupt the delicate balance that allows floating forests to survive. In some regions, human activity, such as the damming of rivers or the draining of wetlands for agricultural use, has led to the destruction of floating forests and the loss of the biodiversity they support. The mystery of floating forests continues to intrigue scientists and environmentalists. While we know much about how these incredible ecosystems form and function, there is still much to learn about their movement, their role in the global environment, and the many species that call them home. These floating forests are a testament to the adaptability and resilience of nature, showing us that life can thrive in even the most unlikely places. Whether drifting on the surface of a remote Amazonian lake or floating across the waters of the Great Lakes, floating forests continue to be a symbol of nature's ability to create life in unexpected ways, offering new possibilities for conservation and a deeper understanding of the natural world. As we've seen, floating forests are some of nature's most extraordinary phenomena, defying conventional expectations of where life can take root. They aren't just marvels of natural engineering, but play a vital, yet often hidden role in the health of our ecosystems. However, their fascinating properties raise many questions and pose intriguing challenges, especially when viewed through the lens of human interaction, climate change, and biodiversity conservation. In the second part, we will explore the complexities and consequences surrounding these enigmatic floating ecosystems, their movement across bodies of water, and the unknowns still surrounding their survival and continued existence. One of the most captivating aspects of floating forests is their apparent mobility. These islands of vegetation are not stationary. They can drift across lakes and rivers, moving with the flow of water, currents, wind, and even seasonal changes. This movement is not just a quirk of their existence. It's an essential part of their life cycle. As they shift, they interact with different parts of the landscape, often creating entirely new environments for both plant and animal life. The movement of floating forests, however, is a double-edged sword. While the ability to relocate might seem like a blessing in terms of adaptability, it also introduces a host of challenges. As these floating ecosystems drift, they can alter local water conditions, sometimes causing ecological imbalances in regions they move into. Floating forests have been known to block sunlight from reaching submerged plant life, reducing photosynthesis in aquatic environments and threatening the health of underwater ecosystems. This shading effect is particularly problematic in smaller bodies of water, where the introduction of large floating mats can disrupt delicate, finely balanced ecosystems. In extreme cases, when floating forests become too large or are carried to an area where they are not naturally suited, they can overwhelm the local environment. Invasive plant species from the floating islands can colonize areas they've drifted into, outcompeting native plants. This phenomenon can lead to a cascading effect, where the local biodiversity is reduced as native species lose the competition for resources. The floating islands themselves become a moving threat to other ecosystems, potentially transforming environments where they previously didn't belong. For instance, in parts of the Amazon, floating forests have been linked to changes in water temperature and oxygen levels, especially in areas where their mass has blocked water flow. During extreme weather events such as heavy rainfall, the floating islands can increase the rate of flooding, exacerbating damage to the surrounding habitats. A study conducted in the region found that dense floating mats could trap large volumes of water, preventing proper drainage and flooding surrounding areas, including terrestrial forests and wildlife habitats. This, in turn, may affect everything from aquatic life to agriculture and human settlements near the riverbanks. Despite these challenges, floating forests also provide significant ecological benefits. For example, their mobility allows these ecosystems to spread nutrients across vast areas. As they move, they bring organic matter from one part of the water body to another. This redistribution can support aquatic life by enhancing nutrient cycling and providing fertile ground for new plant species to take root. Essentially, the floating forests act as natural compost heaps, enriching the ecosystems they touch. The movement of these floating islands can even trigger new forms of plant life to sprout, as displaced roots and vegetation introduce seeds to areas that may not have been able to support such growth before. Another critical element in the survival of floating forests is the role they play in regulating the water quality in their surroundings. The plants that make up the floating forest are highly effective at filtering water. Their roots trap sediments and pollutants, preventing excess nutrients from entering the water and promoting clearer, healthier aquatic environments. These plants also help in controlling erosion by stabilizing the soil beneath the water's surface. Floating mats can prevent shoreline erosion by acting as a natural barrier against strong winds and waves, which often contribute to soil loss in coastal and wetland areas. Furthermore, the floating islands can serve as hotspots of biodiversity. As previously mentioned, the distinct microenvironments created by floating forests support a wide range of species. These ecosystems offer safe haven for many creatures, including amphibians, fish, and various types of birds. Floating forests create unique niches that allow for greater species diversification. The protected environment beneath the dense mats of vegetation is often cooler and more humid than the surrounding air, providing a refuge for animals during the hotter months or seasonal fluctuations in the water. In some cases, the floating forests even contribute to the survival of endangered species by providing them with a stable and secure habitat, helping to preserve their populations. But there's another significant challenge that floats in the background: the increasing threat posed by human activity. Floating forests, particularly in the Amazon basin in Southeast Asia, are being increasingly threatened by human-driven environmental changes. Deforestation, pollution, and the draining of wetlands for agriculture and urbanization have disrupted the natural conditions necessary for floating forests to thrive. These ecosystems are incredibly sensitive to changes in water quality, and as rivers and lakes are polluted or rerouted, the health of floating forests can deteriorate rapidly. In places where human settlements are encroaching on wetland areas, floating islands are at risk of being destroyed or fragmented by human infrastructure. Climate change compounds these challenges. Rising temperatures and changing precipitation patterns are already affecting water levels across the world. In some places, droughts reduce the amount of water needed to support floating forests, while in others, increased rainfall can cause flooding that threatens the integrity of these delicate ecosystems. In addition, climate change affects the seasonal patterns that floating forests rely on, disrupting the timing of growth and movement. One particularly troubling effect of climate change on floating forests is the shifting patterns of water temperature and salinity. Floating forests are often situated in areas where the water is relatively stable in terms of temperature, making it suitable for plant growth. However, climate change can alter these conditions, causing some floating forests to become stressed or uninhabitable for certain species. Warmer water temperatures may cause the plants to wilt or die off, while fluctuating water levels could leave floating islands stranded or unable to move to new locations. These disruptions pose a serious risk to the biodiversity supported by these floating ecosystems, potentially leading to the loss of species that are specially adapted to life on the water. Despite these challenges, the story of floating forests is far from over. Conservation efforts are underway in various parts of the world to protect these vital ecosystems. By better understanding their movement, their role in maintaining biodiversity, and the threats they face, scientists and environmentalists are working to find ways to preserve floating forests for future generations. Restoration projects, like those in the Great Lakes and the Amazon basin, aim to restore the balance between human activity and the natural forces that support floating forests. While the future remains uncertain, the hope is that with concerted efforts, these incredible ecosystems can continue to survive and thrive. In the end, floating forests serve as a powerful reminder of the complexity of nature. They challenge our understanding of how life can exist and adapt in even the most unlikely of environments. They are living examples of how the natural world constantly evolves to meet new challenges, and how, through adaptation, ecosystems can survive even in the face of adversity. The mystery of floating forests remains one of the most captivating enigmas in the natural world, a phenomenon that continues to intrigue and inspire as it floats just beneath the surface of our awareness. The more we learn about them, the more we realize just how much they can teach us about the intricate balance that sustains life on Earth. The existence of floating islands, mysterious masses of vegetation and organic matter that appear to defy the basic laws of nature, has intrigued scientists and explorers for centuries. How do these islands stay afloat? Why don't they sink like any other mass of organic material might? And perhaps even more puzzling, how is it that some of them vanish, only to reappear years later? These floating ecosystems, often composed of peat, plant roots, and decaying organic matter, aren't just natural curiosities. They are a complex marvel of natural engineering, sustained by a delicate balance of physics, chemistry, and biology. Before diving into the science, it's important to note that floating islands are not a singular phenomenon confined to one location. Across the world, floating islands have appeared in various bodies of water, from the serene lakes of South America to the swampy wetlands of Southeast Asia. The most famous of these are often the natural floating islands found in places like Lake Titicaca on the border between Peru and Bolivia, or in the great marshes of Africa and Asia. These islands seem to float effortlessly on the surface, and yet they are far from simple. Behind their survival lies a fascinating interplay of forces and materials that enable them to remain buoyant for long periods of time. At the heart of why these islands stay afloat is something we all learned in elementary school science: buoyancy. Simply put, buoyancy is the force that allows objects to float. In water, buoyancy works because the water pushes up against an object with a force equal to the weight of the water displaced by the object. This is what allows boats to float and, in the case of floating islands, keeps them from sinking into the depths below. However, the material making up these islands is far more complex than just wood or stone. The most common type of floating islands are made of a dense network of plant roots, typically from aquatic plants, such as cattails or reeds. These roots trap water and organic material, creating a mass that is incredibly lightweight compared to its size. The roots also create pockets of air between the tangled fibers of the plants, which increases the island's overall volume without adding substantial weight. This mixture of roots, water, and trapped air creates a floating structure with a density lower than that of water, allowing the island to remain buoyant. In addition to the plant material, peat, the decayed remains of plants, plays a crucial role in the buoyancy of these islands. Peat forms in wetlands where the accumulation of dead plant matter exceeds the rate at which it decomposes. As the peat accumulates, it forms thick, spongy mats that trap water and air. These mats can become quite large, growing into islands that cover significant areas. The decomposition process of peat also releases gases such as methane and carbon dioxide, which further contribute to the island's buoyancy. In essence, the dense, waterlogged peat acts as both the foundation and the life force of the floating island. One of the most remarkable properties of floating islands is that they can survive for long periods without sinking. This resilience can be attributed to the delicate balance of organic material and the water in which they float. The decomposition of plant matter, while necessary for the formation of the island, must occur at a rate that allows the floating mass to remain buoyant. If the decomposition happens too quickly, the island may become too dense and lose its buoyancy, sinking to the bottom. However, if the decomposition is slow and steady, the island can maintain its buoyancy and continue to float. The most perplexing aspect of floating islands, however, is their ability to vanish from sight and later reappear. In many cases, floating islands seem to appear out of nowhere or disappear for years at a time, only to return under specific circumstances. This phenomenon has been documented in several places around the world, where entire floating islands have been seen to drift away or sink below the water's surface, only to resurface months or years later. So, what's going on? The key to understanding this mystery lies in the conditions that govern the water levels and the dynamics of the water's surface. Floating islands are incredibly sensitive to the fluctuations in water levels caused by rainfall, droughts, or seasonal changes. When water levels are high, floating islands can move freely across the surface of the water, drifting with currents or even breaking apart into smaller pieces. Conversely, when water levels drop, the islands may become stranded or trapped in shallow waters, often sinking below the surface due to a lack of buoyancy. It is also possible for these islands to become submerged when they are weighed down by the decomposition of the plant material, causing them to lose the air pockets that provide buoyancy. In regions where seasonal changes are pronounced, floating islands may enter a state of dormancy during dry seasons. During these times, the islands may sink beneath the surface or become too heavy to float, effectively vanishing from sight. However, when the wet season arrives, bringing with it higher water levels and renewed plant growth, these islands can reappear, floating once more to the surface as if they had never disappeared. This cyclical pattern of floating and submerging is a natural phenomenon that has been occurring for centuries in wetlands and marshes across the globe. But this disappearing and reappearing act isn't just a curiosity. It holds significant ecological importance. The ability of floating islands to re-emerge after long periods of time allows these ecosystems to remain stable despite changing environmental conditions. For example, the plants that make up the islands can survive submerged for a time, only to regenerate when conditions improve. This regenerative quality is not only a survival mechanism for the floating islands themselves, but also for the entire ecosystem they support. The return of the islands provides a habitat for a variety of organisms, from insects and birds to fish and amphibians, that depend on this unique environment. In some areas, local human populations have taken advantage of the floating island's cyclical nature. For example, in Lake Titicaca, the Uros people have built entire communities on floating islands made from reeds. These islands are constantly rebuilt and maintained as the plant material decays, and they are capable of being relocated across the lake as needed. The Uros people have lived on these islands for centuries, adapting to the challenges of floating life. This method of adaptation highlights the resilience of floating islands, both natural and man-made, and underscores the intricate relationship between human beings and these extraordinary ecosystems. In sum, the science behind floating islands is a fascinating interplay of biology, chemistry, and physics. The buoyancy of floating islands is not an accident, but rather the result of a carefully balanced system of plant roots, peat, water, and air. The ability of these islands to survive without sinking is due to the stability of this system, while their mysterious reappearance after vanishing for years is tied to the natural cycles of water and plant growth. These floating islands, whether natural or human-made, continue to captivate our imagination and provide valuable insights into the resilience and adaptability of nature. As we move forward into the next part of this exploration, we will uncover how these islands not only survive but thrive in an ever-changing environment, and the fascinating ways they are interconnected with the surrounding ecosystems. We will also delve deeper into the scientific challenges of studying these islands and how modern technology is helping to unlock their mysteries. In the first part of this chapter, we explored how floating islands are able to stay afloat, why they don't sink, and the mysterious reappearance of islands that seem to vanish for years. But the story doesn't end there. Beyond their physical structure and buoyancy, these floating islands hold even more intriguing secrets. How do these islands interact with their environment? What role do they play in the surrounding ecosystems? And how do they continue to evolve under ever-changing conditions? The answers to these questions reveal not just natural marvels, but also crucial ecological lessons. One of the most fascinating aspects of floating islands is how they serve as unique, mobile ecosystems. The very structure of these islands creates an environment that is drastically different from the land or water surrounding them. On a floating island, plant life grows densely. Roots intertwine with each other, and a complex web of microbes, fungi, and bacteria exists within the organic material. This creates a diverse ecosystem that, in some cases, mirrors the biodiversity of both aquatic and terrestrial habitats. The plants that grow on floating islands are adapted to thrive in an environment where they are submerged and exposed to air in alternating cycles. The most common species that colonize these islands are aquatic plants, such as reeds and grasses. These plants not only act as the physical framework for the floating islands, but they also provide food and shelter for a variety of organisms. Small insects, amphibians, and even fish are known to inhabit these floating masses. Birds, too, take advantage of the islands for nesting. In many cases, floating islands offer a refuge for species that might otherwise have difficulty surviving in the surrounding environment. This constant movement of floating islands also plays a crucial role in the redistribution of nutrients across the landscape. As these islands drift across lakes, rivers, or marshes, they can bring plant material from one area to another. This helps to replenish nutrients in nutrient-depleted areas, creating a form of natural fertilization. The decaying plant matter that floats on these islands provides an influx of organic material into the water, benefiting aquatic plants and organisms. This transfer of nutrients can help foster biodiversity, promoting a thriving ecosystem in areas that might otherwise lack resources. But the ecological role of floating islands doesn't end with the nutrients they bring to surrounding waters. These islands also serve as stabilizing forces for the bodies of water they inhabit. By preventing shoreline erosion, floating islands act as a buffer between the land and the water. The plant material and root systems trap sediment and reduce the impact of waves against the shore. In essence, floating islands can act as natural shoreline protectors, preserving the integrity of the shoreline while also supporting aquatic ecosystems. Floating islands can also serve as an important refuge in times of environmental change. For example, they offer a sanctuary for aquatic life in areas affected by water level fluctuations. When the water level drops, many aquatic species are left without adequate habitat. Floating islands offer these species a place to retreat, ensuring their survival during droughts or seasonal shifts. Similarly, in areas affected by flooding, floating islands can provide a place for land-based species to find refuge from rising waters. While floating islands appear to offer many benefits, they are not impervious to environmental challenges. One of the most pressing issues they face is the threat of human activity. Overfishing, pollution, and habitat destruction can disrupt the delicate balance of the ecosystem that supports these floating islands. For example, the introduction of invasive species, whether plant or animal, can alter the composition of the islands, pushing out native species and disrupting the ecological balance. Climate change also poses a significant threat. Rising temperatures and shifting precipitation patterns can alter water levels, leading to the destabilization of floating islands. In some cases, floating islands that were once stable may become submerged or break apart due to the changing conditions. Despite these threats, there is a growing interest in the conservation of floating islands and the ecosystems they support. Researchers and conservationists are working to better understand the delicate balance of these floating ecosystems in order to protect them from human impact and environmental change. Advances in technology, particularly remote sensing and satellite imaging, have made it easier to monitor the movement and condition of floating islands. This has allowed scientists to gain a deeper understanding of how these islands respond to changes in water levels, temperature, and other environmental factors. One of the most fascinating discoveries in recent years has been the ability of floating islands to regenerate after periods of dormancy or apparent disappearance. Researchers have found that when water levels rise, submerged islands can re-emerge, their plants and organic matter growing back to the surface as the conditions become more favorable. This regenerative process is an extraordinary example of nature's resilience. The ability to bounce back after environmental hardship highlights the floating islands' role as survivors in an ever-changing world. This resilience extends to human-made floating islands as well. In places like Lake Titicaca, where the Uros people have constructed entire communities on floating islands made from reeds, there's a deep understanding of the cycles and care required to maintain these islands. The Uros people have been building and sustaining their islands for centuries, passing down techniques for managing the balance of buoyancy and plant growth. These islands are constantly rebuilt, with new layers of reeds added to maintain their structural integrity. The people living on these islands understand the importance of preserving the ecosystem that sustains them, and they continue to adapt to the shifting waters and changing environmental conditions. Beyond their ecological significance, floating islands also offer insights into the adaptability of life itself. The process by which these islands are created, through the slow accumulation of plant matter and peat, illustrates how life can thrive in unexpected conditions. Floating islands are nature's answer to the challenge of surviving in fluctuating environments, where stability is a rare commodity. Their survival and regeneration offer valuable lessons in resilience, adaptation, and the interconnectedness of life on Earth. As we look to the future, floating islands may offer a model for sustainable living. With the challenges posed by climate change and rising sea levels, scientists are exploring the potential for creating artificial floating islands, structures designed to float on water, but built with human ingenuity. These artificial islands could provide a solution for rising populations in coastal areas, offering a new type of habitat that could alleviate pressure on overpopulated cities. While we may not yet have fully harnessed the potential of floating islands, the lessons they teach us about balance, survival, and adaptability will likely continue to shape the way we think about both nature and technology. The secret floating islands of Africa. Unknown to many, Africa has vast networks of drifting land that change shape over time. When we think of floating islands, images of remote lakes or tranquil rivers often come to mind, conjuring up visions of small, self-contained ecosystems gently drifting across calm waters. But what if I told you that in the heart of Africa, there are vast, shifting networks of floating land masses that have remained largely unknown to the outside world? These floating islands are not just mere curiosities of nature. They represent a long-held, mysterious phenomenon with deep ties to the continent's ecosystems, history, and even future sustainability. While the concept of floating islands is familiar to many, especially in places like Lake Titicaca in South America, it is Africa that holds an equally astonishing and largely unexplored network of floating landforms. Spread across several of the continent's largest and most iconic bodies of water, these islands form a unique and ever-changing landscape that has remained under the radar of mainstream scientific attention for far too long. In this chapter, we will delve into the fascinating world of Africa's floating islands, examining their mysterious origins, their role in African ecosystems, and the potential they hold for understanding the region's past, present, and future. From the sprawling wetlands of Central Africa to the rich biodiversity of the Congo River Basin, Africa's floating islands offer a glimpse into a phenomenon that challenges our understanding of land and water, and the forces that bind them together. What makes floating islands especially intriguing is that they are not static. These islands are highly mobile, constantly drifting and shifting with the movement of water currents. Over time, some of these islands can grow to massive sizes, with some even taking on the appearance of small floating ecosystems. They support a variety of plant and animal life, acting as islands within an island. But in Africa, floating islands are not just a curiosity, they are an integral part of the continent's diverse landscapes. They exist in multiple regions, each with unique characteristics, and their existence offers a new lens through which to view Africa's ecosystems. The Congo River Basin, a key location for floating islands. One of the most notable places where Africa's floating islands can be found is in the Congo River Basin, a region known for its dense rainforests and immense biodiversity. The Congo River, Africa's second-largest river by discharge, winds its way through Central Africa, passing through countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, the Republic of Congo, and Angola. This area is home to an extensive network of wetlands, marshes, and floodplains, environments that are perfectly suited for the formation of floating islands. The Congo River and its tributaries create a dynamic water system, with fluctuating water levels that can either flood or drain large portions of land. These seasonal variations in water level play a key role in the creation of floating islands. As the waters rise, they saturate the surrounding wetlands, creating conditions where plants and vegetation can accumulate and form floating mats. These mats of vegetation become increasingly thick and dense, eventually developing into floating islands that can drift across the water in search of more fertile land or better conditions. While the Congo River Basin has seen relatively little research on its floating islands, some studies have indicated that these islands play an important ecological role. Not only do they support a range of plant species, but they also provide refuge for various animal species, including birds, amphibians, and fish. These floating ecosystems serve as moving islands of biodiversity, offering shelter and a breeding ground for species that would otherwise be exposed to the harsh conditions of the surrounding environment. The Okavango Delta, a land of constant change. Another fascinating region where floating islands are found is the Okavango Delta in southern Africa. This expansive inland delta, located in Botswana, is known for its dynamic, ever-changing landscape. The Okavango Delta is a result of the Okavango River, which floods the area seasonally, creating a labyrinth of channels, lagoons, and islands. It is here, in this constantly shifting environment, that floating islands are formed and continue to evolve. The Okavango Delta is one of the largest inland deltas in the world, and its water system is unique in that it doesn't flow into the ocean. Instead, the waters that flow into the delta evaporate or seep into the ground. This constant fluctuation of water levels causes the delta to be in a constant state of change, creating the perfect conditions for floating islands to form. During the wet season, plants and grasses that thrive in the wetlands begin to accumulate, eventually creating floating islands. These islands can be small, with only a few square meters of plant matter, or they can grow large enough to support entire forests of trees. In addition to being a crucial part of the ecosystem, these floating islands are important for local communities. They provide a space for wildlife to thrive and offer resources for local inhabitants who rely on the river's ecosystem for fishing, water, and food. The seasonal shifts in the Okavango Delta's water levels also make these islands highly valuable for agricultural use, as they can provide fertile ground for growing crops. However, the floating islands of the Okavango Delta are facing increasing pressure from climate change. As water levels fluctuate, the balance that allows these islands to thrive is at risk. Studies indicate that shifting weather patterns, including prolonged droughts and erratic rainfall, have caused the waters of the Okavango River to decline in some years, leading to the shrinking of these floating islands. The importance of floating islands to African ecosystems. The floating islands of Africa are not only a unique phenomenon but also serve critical functions in their respective ecosystems. As mobile land masses, they are essential in helping to distribute nutrients across the landscape. Floating islands often serve as conduits for organic material, allowing plant life and sediment to move across bodies of water, enriching the surrounding environment. Furthermore, floating islands provide critical habitats for wildlife. In the Okavango Delta, for instance, they offer shelter to animals, especially during the flood season, when much of the surrounding land is submerged. Floating islands also serve as refuges for fish, amphibians, and birds, acting as safe havens where these species can escape predators and adverse environmental conditions. The role of these floating islands extends beyond their immediate ecological impact. They provide insight into the complex dynamics of water systems, land use, and biodiversity in Africa. The delicate balance between the water and land is key to understanding how these ecosystems function and how they can be protected in the future. Unraveling the mystery. What makes them drift? One of the most compelling mysteries surrounding Africa's floating islands is how these land masses drift across vast expanses of water. The movement of these islands can be explained by a combination of factors, including water currents, wind, and the material composition of the islands themselves. Because the islands are made up of organic materials, they are lightweight and buoyant, which allows them to drift across water with the flow of currents. However, their movement is not entirely random. These islands tend to drift in a particular direction, following the path of water currents or prevailing winds. The unique movement of these floating islands has intrigued researchers and environmentalists for years. How do these ecosystems respond to the forces of nature? How do they interact with the shifting water patterns? These questions continue to drive exploration into Africa's floating islands, and each new discovery only adds more layers to the mystery. In the first part of this chapter, we laid the foundation for understanding the remarkable floating islands of Africa. Massive, drifting land masses that quietly defy the norms of geography and nature. These islands, scattered across regions like the Congo River Basin and the Okavango Delta, offer us more than just a glimpse into an extraordinary ecological phenomenon. They are symbols of resilience, adaptation, and the complex forces that drive Africa's aquatic ecosystems. But what happens when we delve deeper into the science behind their existence? How do these islands survive? And what role do they play in shaping the continent's future? In this second part, we'll dive deeper into the consequences of floating island ecosystems, the scientific exploration that's been conducted and much that remains to be done, and the urgent challenges they face. We'll also discuss what the future holds for these secretive and shifting islands, and how they might offer a window into sustainable solutions for some of the continent's most pressing environmental concerns. The science behind floating islands. How do they stay afloat? Before we can understand the true significance of these floating islands, we need to examine the science that allows them to exist in the first place. It's one thing to marvel at their mystery, but how do they function? Why do they stay afloat for extended periods, even after becoming large enough to support small ecosystems. And more intriguingly, how do they sometimes vanish only to reappear years later? The primary factor that allows these islands to float is the combination of buoyancy and the specific composition of the plant material that makes them up. As we discussed earlier, floating islands are primarily made up of vegetation and organic material, everything from peat and decomposed plant matter to roots and algae. This dense, water-saturated material has a low enough density that it allows the islands to float. However, the true key to their resilience lies in the structure and composition of these islands. Floating islands are made up of tangled root systems that create a complex network, a form of natural engineering that offers both stability and flexibility. The roots of plants like papyrus and other wetland species intertwine, creating a mat that is not only buoyant, but also incredibly stable. These mats can span several meters in diameter, providing a surface that allows more plants to take root, thus supporting the island's growth over time. This delicate balance between buoyancy and density is also what allows floating islands to adapt and reappear after vanishing. The fluctuations in water levels, a common feature in areas like the Okavango Delta, play a significant role. When water levels rise, floating islands may become submerged or break apart, but as the water recedes, these islands can re-emerge, restructuring themselves or moving to different locations. This dynamic process allows the floating islands to endure despite shifting environmental conditions. Understanding these processes is still a work in progress. Scientists continue to study how these islands manage to survive and adapt to the fluctuating ecosystems in which they exist. As we face changing environmental conditions worldwide, these floating islands could hold valuable lessons for building sustainable systems in an increasingly volatile climate. The ecological role. More than just floating land. Africa's floating islands are not only remarkable for their physical existence, but also for the crucial roles they play in the environment. These floating ecosystems serve as small, mobile sanctuaries for wildlife, offering refuge and breeding grounds for species that rely on these stable microhabitats. As we've seen in the Okavango Delta, these islands are rich in biodiversity. They host numerous plant species and act as nesting sites for birds, amphibians, and small mammals. These diverse organisms form a delicate ecological web, supporting both aquatic and terrestrial species. For example, the Congo River and its surrounding wetlands are home to numerous endemic species of birds, fish, and amphibians, many of which depend on the floating islands for survival. These islands, often covered with dense plant life, serve as safe havens for birds like the African jacana, which thrives in the floating vegetation of the Congo River basin. Fish species also use these islands as breeding grounds, finding shelter in the submerged roots and vegetation. In some cases, the islands can act as natural filters, purifying the surrounding water. The plant matter on these floating islands can absorb excess nutrients and help to prevent water pollution in surrounding areas. The islands, in essence, serve as the guardians of water quality, stabilizing the ecosystem and maintaining biodiversity in an area otherwise subject to the damaging effects of erosion and environmental change. But these islands are not just beneficial for the wildlife that inhabit them. They also play an important role in the local communities. In regions like the Okavango Delta, people rely on the delta's resources for their livelihoods. These floating islands, through their role in maintaining a healthy ecosystem, indirectly support agriculture, fishing, and tourism in the area. Human encroachment and environmental pressures. Despite their resilience, Africa's floating islands are not immune to the pressures of human activity and environmental change. The most significant threat to these islands is habitat destruction caused by human encroachment. As Africa's population grows and the demand for land, water, and resources intensifies, wetland ecosystems, including those that support floating islands, are increasingly under threat. In places like the Okavango Delta, infrastructure development and agricultural expansion put immense pressure on the fragile environment. Water diversion projects, in particular, can disrupt the seasonal flooding that is necessary for the formation of these floating islands. As water levels decrease due to these changes, the delicate balance that allows the islands to survive is threatened. Climate change also plays a role in destabilizing these ecosystems. With increasingly erratic rainfall patterns and prolonged droughts affecting the region, the delicate equilibrium of water levels that supports the growth and movement of these islands is becoming harder to maintain. Droughts may cause the islands to shrink or become stranded in less fertile regions, while too much water can wash them away altogether. Moreover, pollution and invasive species present growing challenges. The accumulation of pollutants like plastics, agricultural runoff, and industrial waste in wetlands impacts both the floating islands and the species that rely on them. Invasive plants and animals can outcompete native species, further destabilizing the ecosystem. The future of Africa's floating islands. Despite the challenges they face, Africa's floating islands hold untapped potential for the future. As we continue to explore their mysteries, these islands offer important lessons on the resilience of nature and the need for sustainable land use practices. Researchers are starting to look at these islands not just as curiosities of nature, but as models for future sustainability. In the coming decades, as Africa faces the dual challenges of climate change and rapid development, the role of floating islands could become even more important. By studying the unique dynamics of these floating ecosystems, scientists may uncover valuable insights into natural water management, biodiversity conservation, and ecosystem restoration. In addition to their ecological value, floating islands could also offer practical applications. For instance, the technologies inspired by floating wetlands are already being used in some parts of the world to clean polluted water. The natural filtering properties of these floating systems could be applied to urban environments, providing innovative solutions to the growing problem of water pollution in Africa's rapidly expanding cities. There is also potential for these islands to become more integrated into conservation efforts. By better understanding how floating islands are formed, scientists could identify ways to preserve and protect these unique ecosystems, ensuring they continue to provide shelter for wildlife and serve as valuable environmental buffers. Ultimately, the floating islands of Africa represent not only a fascinating natural phenomenon, but also a testament to the ability of nature to adapt and thrive under challenging circumstances. Their story is far from over, and as we uncover more about how they survive and function, we may find the keys to solving some of Africa's most pressing environmental problems. Phantom Islands of Southeast Asia. Small, floating islands that appear on maps and then disappear forever. Southeast Asia, a region brimming with ancient maritime history and vast networks of islands, harbors a story of bizarre geographical phenomena. Amidst the cluster of islands and archipelagos, some islands have captured the fascination of sailors, cartographers, and historians alike, yet have never truly existed. These are the Phantom Islands of Southeast Asia, elusive landmasses that once appeared on nautical maps, only to vanish without a trace. In this chapter, we'll explore the phenomena behind these mysterious islands, uncovering the factors that led to their inclusion on maps and the subsequent disappearance. We'll dive into the history, the research, and the theories surrounding these phantom islands that once tantalized explorers and sparked intrigue. From misidentifications to intentional fabrications, the story of these vanishing islands opens a window into the complex history of navigation, cartography, and exploration in Southeast Asia. The origins of phantom islands. To understand why certain islands have vanished from maps and historical records, it's important to first understand the context of cartography during the age of exploration. This was a time when maps were drawn with limited knowledge, based heavily on conjecture, sailors' accounts, and mythical stories. In Southeast Asia, sailors, traders, and explorers navigated vast and often uncharted waters relying on landmarks, and sometimes vague descriptions passed along by previous expeditions. The mysterious islands often mark the boundaries of the known world, places where legend and fact collided. A classic example of this phenomenon is the Islands of Gold, islands that were rumored to be filled with untold riches. Many of these supposed islands were never seen again, leading later explorers to dub them phantoms. These islands were sometimes based on false reports from traders or simply misinterpretations of islands already charted. The Phantom Islands of Southeast Asia. A deep dive. Let's examine some of the most infamous phantom islands that have haunted the maps of Southeast Asia over the centuries. These islands have become legends in their own right, captivating the imaginations of explorers, cartographers, and historians. Shot 1. The Island of San Borondon. One of the most enduring phantom islands in the waters of Southeast Asia is the island of San Borondon. This island was first reported by European explorers during the 15th century as part of the Canary Islands archipelago. According to these explorers, San Borondon was a landmass that would occasionally appear and disappear off the coast of Asia. The island was described as a lush, fertile paradise that seemed to elude every ship that tried to reach it. Historical accounts of the island grew out of a mix of mythical and real-world influences. The Spanish were particularly intrigued by this island, and even the famous explorer Christopher Columbus reportedly mentioned seeing it while sailing near the Canary Islands. Yet, despite repeated attempts, no evidence of its existence has ever been found. Some theorize that the reports of San Borondon were based on the misinterpretation of fog banks, mirages, or even reflections of distant islands, phenomena known as superior mirages. 2. The Island of the Rocks. Another well-documented phantom island in the region is the Island of the Rocks, which appeared on numerous early maps of Southeast Asia. This island, located near the Philippines, was mentioned in 1587 by David Abercrombie, a Scottish navigator, who noted its existence on a sea chart. It was described as a rock formation surrounded by dangerous reefs, yet every ship that sailed toward it came away puzzled and empty-handed. Despite the detailed accounts and geographic positioning, no modern expeditions have ever found evidence of this island. Theories suggest it may have been a mislabeling of an existing rocky reef or a cartographer's error based on inaccurate measurements. Nevertheless, the mystery of the Island of the Rocks persists, adding to the mythos of phantom islands in Southeast Asian waters. 3. The Island of Java. Minor. The island of Java Minor, not to be confused with the well-known Indonesian island of Java, was listed on early European maps of Southeast Asia as a small landmass off the southern coast of Sumatra. It is believed to have been included on maps drawn by Portuguese and Dutch navigators in the 16th century. Despite its repeated appearances on maps, no contemporary explorer has ever encountered the island, nor has it appeared in modern satellite imagery. Some believe that it may have been a misidentified region, a natural feature like a sandbar or rock formation that vanished with shifting tides or coastal erosion. Another theory is that Java Minor was based on rumors from sailors who reported seeing a distant landmass, but couldn't find it again due to the changing currents and weather conditions. 4. The Island of the Three Kings. An early map produced in 1600 included an island off the coast of Borneo, called the Island of the Three Kings. It was named after the three large peaks that were said to rise dramatically from the sea, resembling a trio of kings. However, despite detailed charts that showed its location, no one ever found this island during subsequent explorations. Later, some suggested that the island might have been based on a mirage or an exaggeration from sailors who mistook a volcanic eruption or rock formation for a landmass. As Southeast Asia's navigational methods improved, the island gradually faded from maps, though it still occupies a place in the annals of maritime history. Theories behind the Phantom Islands. As we explore the Phantom Islands of Southeast Asia, we must consider the theories that attempt to explain their existence. Why would these islands appear on maps and then disappear, sometimes without explanation? There are several factors to consider. 1. Errors in cartography. One of the primary reasons for Phantom Islands is the inherent limitations of cartography during the age of exploration. Navigators often relied on inaccurate instruments, sometimes basing their coordinates on dead reckoning or rough estimations. As such, it's easy to see how a single navigational error could lead to the identification of a non-existent island. Cartographers also relied on reports from sailors who might have misinterpreted natural phenomena like fog, rocks, or islands out of view. These reports could be inaccurate or exaggerated, leading to the inclusion of phantom islands on maps. 2. Misidentification of natural phenomena. The sea is full of optical illusions, and early explorers often relied on a mixture of empirical observation and legend. One of the most common explanations for phantom islands is the phenomenon of superior mirages, optical illusions caused by atmospheric conditions that make objects appear above the horizon. These mirages could create the illusion of distant land masses, leading sailors to believe they had encountered new islands that were, in fact, nothing more than atmospheric distortions. 3. Intentional fabrications. Another possibility is that some of these phantom islands were created intentionally. In some cases, navigators or cartographers may have fabricated reports of islands in order to claim new territories or mislead competitors. These fabricated islands would then appear on maps as part of the colonial race for new lands, a common practice during the 16th and 17th centuries. 4. Uncharted or hidden islands. It's also possible that some of these phantom islands were based on land masses that existed for brief periods, but were later submerged, eroded, or hidden by changing tides or volcanic activity. Some of these islands could have been small atolls or volcanic islands that appeared briefly and then vanished into the sea, leaving no trace behind. The continuing fascination of phantom islands. Though modern satellite technology has provided us with detailed maps of the world's oceans, the allure of phantom islands has not diminished. They remain a topic of fascination for historians, cartographers, and adventurers alike. The mystery of these islands speaks to the uncertainty and wonder that defined the age of exploration, a time when the world's oceans seemed vast, unknown, and filled with possibility. In this chapter, we've explored some of the most notable phantom islands of Southeast Asia, shedding light on their origins, their mysterious disappearance, and the theories that attempt to explain them. But while many of these islands have vanished from modern maps, their legacy continues to fuel the imaginations of those who seek to understand the unknown. Consequences of the Phantom Island phenomenon. The existence and subsequent disappearance of phantom islands have had profound consequences, not only on navigation and exploration but also on how people viewed the world during the Age of Exploration. These vanished islands had a psychological and cultural impact, driving human curiosity and inspiring both skepticism and wonder. 1. A shift in maritime exploration. The hunt for phantom islands and the subsequent disproving of their existence significantly impacted how sailors and navigators approached exploration. At the height of their popularity, these islands were regarded with awe and speculation, leading to a surge in expeditions aimed at discovering them. Explorers invested years of their lives, sometimes at great personal cost, to search for these islands, only to be disappointed when no land was found. The fruitless expeditions eventually fostered a more cautious and empirical approach to navigation. By the 18th century, as better navigational tools and more accurate maps began to emerge, the age of phantom islands began to wane. Cartographers, once relying on speculation, gradually shifted toward more scientific methods, marking the beginning of a more rigorous, fact-based approach to mapping. This shift had far-reaching effects on global exploration. The focus began to turn from mythical lands and phantom islands to uncharted territories that were grounded in reality. However, even as the existence of phantom islands was debunked, they left an indelible mark on the history of exploration. 2. Influence on regional myths and culture. In Southeast Asia, where maritime trade and exploration were pivotal to many cultures, phantom islands took on a life of their own in regional folklore. Many of the vanished islands became subjects of myth and legend, perpetuating tales of hidden treasure, lost civilizations, and mystical lands. Take, for example, the island of the Three Kings. While no physical evidence of the island was ever found, its place in the imagination of the region persisted. As sailors and traders from different parts of the world passed through Southeast Asia, they added their own interpretations to the story of this mysterious island. Its peaks were said to hold magical significance, and the island became a place of intrigue for those seeking adventure and fortune. The idea of lost or hidden islands is deeply ingrained in many Southeast Asian cultures, from the legends of Sumatra's hidden gold islands to the floating cities of the South China Sea. Even today, stories of such islands continue to surface among local communities, suggesting that the cultural memory of these phantom islands is alive and well. Modern-day exploration and the mystery resurrected. As global technology advanced, particularly with satellite imagery and deep-sea exploration tools, many assumed that the era of phantom islands was over. Yet, as we turn to the modern-day exploration of these waters, the question arises, could there still be undiscovered islands, submerged or hidden by natural forces, waiting to be found? 1. The role of satellite technology. Modern satellite imagery has revolutionized the way we map the world. The accuracy with which we can now monitor and document changes in our environment has led some to believe that certain phantom islands may not have been mere fabrications or misidentifications after all. In fact, some scientists and explorers still hold on to the idea that there are land masses out there, undiscovered, hidden, or submerged, that could fit the bill of a modern phantom island. For example, in 2017, scientists discovered a previously unknown landmass in the South Pacific. Dubbed Sandy Island, it had appeared on many historical maps but had been entirely absent from modern satellite imagery. When a research vessel went to investigate the location, they found no trace of the island. Could this be an echo of the phantom islands of the past? Was Sandy Island once a small transient landmass that simply disappeared due to natural phenomena like erosion or volcanic activity? Or was it an error in early mapping? Despite this, there are still pockets of unexplored territory in the vast expanse of Southeast Asia's archipelagic waters, and it's possible that phantom islands in some form continue to exist. The idea of floating or submerged islands is still a compelling subject for researchers, and with technological advancements, the lines between myth and reality continue to blur. 2. The environmental mystery. Could these islands return? One of the most intriguing aspects of the phantom island phenomena is the idea that some of these islands, whether real or imagined, could potentially return. The question is, could these islands reappear after years of vanishing, as certain disappearing islands have been described as having the capacity to do? The Ghost Island of New Zealand, the island that floated away and was lost at sea. In the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, off the coast of New Zealand, lies a mystery that has captivated sailors, historians, and explorers for centuries. It's a story of an island that, quite literally, vanished into thin air, an island that was once charted, documented, and even inhabited, but then disappeared, leaving no trace behind. This is the enigma of the Ghost Island of New Zealand, a floating landmass that one day simply floated away and was lost forever to the sea. The tale begins in the early 19th century, a time when European exploration was sweeping across the Pacific. The island, later referred to as the Sandy Island, was first recorded on maritime maps in the early 1800s by British navigator Captain Cook. Known for his remarkable voyages across the Pacific, Cook was instrumental in mapping the coastlines and islands of New Zealand and Australia. During his journeys, a peculiar feature appeared on his charts, an island located northeast of New Zealand in the Coral Sea, situated between New Zealand and New Caledonia. Sandy Island was described as a small, flat landmass, appearing to be several miles across. According to the records, it was an uninhabited island, with no detailed observations about its resources or geography. It was simply another dot on a map, a seemingly insignificant piece of land, yet it would become one of the most mysterious entries in the annals of cartography. For decades, Sandy Island appeared on maps, and sailors passed by it on their journeys, confirming its existence. But it wasn't until the 20th century that cracks began to appear in the story. In the early 1900s, further expeditions to the area found no trace of the island. Ships that had relied on the island as a navigational reference found themselves puzzled, unable to locate its supposed location. In 1979, a comprehensive investigation of the island was launched by Australian researchers. Using modern navigational tools, the research team ventured into the Coral Sea, mapping the coordinates where Sandy Island should have been. They returned with nothing but ocean, a vast stretch of open water where an island had once been marked on all maps. By the 21st century, the island's existence was questioned. Satellites scanning the area showed no landmass. What was once considered a prominent island on the map had seemingly vanished. Over the years, numerous theories have been put forward to explain its disappearance, but no conclusive answers have been found. One theory suggests that Sandy Island was, in fact, a navigational error, a mirage created by the combination of ocean currents, tides, and weather patterns that led to its illusionary appearance on maps. This theory posits that the island was never a permanent landmass, but rather a temporary accumulation of sand or debris that shifted with the seasons and disappeared over time. Another theory suggests that Sandy Island may have been the victim of a natural disaster. Earthquakes and underwater volcanic activity are common in this region of the Pacific, and it's possible that the island was submerged due to such a catastrophic event. Given that the ocean depths in the area reach up to 4,000 meters, it's plausible that an underwater eruption or tectonic shift could have sunk the island without leaving a trace. Despite these explanations, the story of Sandy Island, or the Ghost Island of New Zealand, remains one of the most perplexing maritime mysteries of all time. How could an island, once so well documented and established on maritime maps, simply vanish? Was it an error of early cartography, or did nature play a hand in its disappearance? As we continue to explore this unsolved mystery, we'll delve deeper into the fascinating history of the island's appearances and the growing list of attempts to track it down. The Ghost Island of New Zealand might be lost to time, but the questions it raises about the reliability of maps, the volatility of our planet, and the mysteries lurking beneath the surface of the oceans will keep us searching for answers. In the aftermath of Sandy Island's disappearance from modern maps, a wave of intrigue spread across the scientific community. The case of the missing island begged many questions. How could something so well documented simply vanish? Was Sandy Island a victim of natural forces, a tragic case of cartographic error, or perhaps even a deliberate hoax? To answer these questions, we must continue exploring the consequences, the research, and the speculations that followed this baffling mystery. As satellite technology advanced in the 21st century, researchers hoped to find conclusive evidence of Sandy Island's fate. The introduction of more precise mapping techniques and high-resolution satellite imagery was thought to solve the mystery once and for all. Yet, despite numerous attempts, every image of the region failed to detect anything resembling an island. With each passing year, as the island remained undetected, the probability of its existence seemed to diminish. But what could have happened to a landmass that had been reliably documented for centuries? The theory of a natural disaster, particularly an underwater volcanic eruption, gained significant traction. The Pacific Ring of Fire is infamous for its seismic activity, including earthquakes and underwater volcanoes. This region is home to the world's deepest oceanic trenches and most active fault lines, and it's not inconceivable that Sandy Island could have been the victim of such a catastrophic event. Earthquakes beneath the sea could have triggered a violent volcanic eruption, causing the island to sink into the ocean or be swallowed by a large-scale tsunami. In fact, the ocean floor around the Coral Sea has been mapped as having significant tectonic movement, and underwater volcanic eruptions in the area are not rare. This theory could explain why no remnants of Sandy Island have been found. If the island was sunk to the ocean floor, it could have been irretrievably lost, hidden deep beneath the waves. However, another possibility that has gained attention is the theory of it being a floating landmass, a temporary formation, created by a combination of environmental factors, like a buildup of sand and plant material driven by ocean currents. If such an island existed, it would have been a fragile structure, nothing more than a thin layer of debris floating atop the water, easily eroded by tides or storms. If this was indeed the case, Sandy Island might not have disappeared at all, but rather it might have simply been washed away over time, unable to sustain its presence. The forces of nature in the Pacific Ocean are incredibly powerful, and even large land masses are subject to gradual erosion, making it entirely plausible that a floating island could vanish without warning. Another theory to explore is that Sandy Island may never have existed in the first place. Some researchers believe the island was the result of early cartographic mistakes, possibly a mirage or a misinterpretation of distant landforms or cloud formations. In the 18th and 19th centuries, navigation tools were not as advanced as they are today. Mariners often relied on crude maps, visual observations, and reports from other sailors, all of which were subject to human error. It is possible that Sandy Island was simply a figment of inaccurate mapping, a mistake that became ingrained in the maritime records of the time. The island could have appeared to be real on early maps because of repeated reports, but no physical evidence ever existed to back up the claims. As the years passed, some took a more fantastical approach to the legend of Sandy Island. The idea that it could be a remnant of some ancient lost civilization, or even a phantom island, a term used for islands that have mysteriously appeared and disappeared on maps over the centuries, gained traction. Some enthusiasts even suggested that Sandy Island could be a place where the forces of nature interacted in strange ways, creating temporary land masses that vanished after a set period. The combination of ocean currents, winds, and tides could theoretically cause a shifting island, one that appears and disappears like clockwork, similar to the mysterious disappearances of other phantom islands in the Pacific. Despite all the theories, the one thing that remains clear is that Sandy Island was a significant presence in historical cartography and exploration. Its disappearance raised questions about the accuracy of early mapping, the reliability of ship-based observations, and the unpredictable nature of the ocean. But it also gave birth to one of the greatest geographical mysteries of the modern era: the search for an island that might never have existed, or one that disappeared under mysterious circumstances, has become a symbol of our perpetual search for knowledge and understanding in an ever-changing world. So, what is the final verdict on the ghost island of New Zealand? Was it a mirage, an illusion, or the victim of a natural disaster? The truth may never be fully known. But as long as curiosity exists, the mystery of Sandy Island will continue to spark questions, inspire explorations, and provoke wonder. While we may never see the island reappear, the search for it reminds us of the many hidden truths lurking beneath the surface of the oceans. Truths that, like the ghost island itself, may remain lost forever in the deep, dark waters of the Pacific. Thanks for exploring the secrets of the floating island, nature's wonder with us. If you enjoyed uncovering the mysteries behind these incredible floating phenomena, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more fascinating stories. Don't forget to ring the bell for notifications so you won't miss out on any of our future deep dives. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop your theories and questions about floating islands in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious and keep seeking the wonders of nature.